you're a fascinating guy. You're an author with multiple books. You're a filmmaker. So why don't you just start by telling us, like, who is Robert Orlando? The book title is Karl Marx, The Divine Tragedy, as opposed to the Divine Comedy, for people who don't catch that. The people that have the greatest potential to be saints have the greatest potential to be sinners, and vice versa. I mean, when you have these people that have passion in their heart.
He was shaping a moral quest, a revolution that was basically the material way of saying a new eschaton is coming. Mankind will be changed, but instead of changing him spiritually, Dante's warning, he's going to change him materially. It failed on so many ways, and so because his fundamental flaw was, if you want to be technical, he didn't understand anthropology.
Is another way of saying that his fundamental flaw is he just did not appreciate original sin.
Yeah. I had some Hollywood friends who they were really into the Shroud, and they knew people, and they knew that whole network. My filter was, what if you just went to the cross as a crime scene, and this is your forensic evidence? CSI meets the cross. As a filmmaker and a photographer, you have to understand, for me, like years of looking at images, their pixelation and detail level. First thing was, that's way too many details to be phony. It's just too specific. You can't explain it in human science what happened, and no one could.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Robert.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for being here, man. And it's weird because I was at the beach last week on vacation with my kids and my wife, and I told myself I wasn't going to work, right? And then I said, but I got this guy named Robert Orlando coming in. So who wants to watch a documentary on Patton? And so we sat at the beach and we watched it. I was like, this doesn't really count as work because it's fun, but I had to prepare anyway. And I was kind of fascinated with your work on Patton. And there's some great conspiracy theories around that. And then I learned that you've done stuff on the Shroud, and you've done stuff on the Pope and the President, or called the Divine Plan. And now we got a book coming out with you on To Hell with Karl Marx, and his rather incredible story. And we're going to talk about that. But you're a fascinating guy. You're a Pauline scholar, St. Paul scholar. You are an author with multiple books. You're a filmmaker. That's pretty amazing. So why don't you just start by telling us, like, who is Robert Orlando?
Wow. How long do we have?
You got as long as you want.
Wow. I think I'm a synthesis of everything you just described. So probably I learned I love academia. I love the study, research part of it. But I'm also very visual, and I see the world through story. And I'm also just someone who thinks philosophically and tries to break into the arena of ideas. So given my journey, that's not something I just thought of. That was almost like, try this, go this way, realize the limitations of this environment. That at some point it became clear to me that I started as an independent filmmaker. That came from very early on. My family is old world. I'm Italian Catholic, but from early on, showing pictures and telling stories to each other, especially across the sea, was a way of like connecting. And there's so much a picture says, 1,000 words. So visuals came from my experience. I came from a very even though they were immigrants or first generation, very learned people. Like I had the one uncle who was the historian, the other one. So Thanksgiving dinner was like speaking about what happened to Jesus at the tomb. And, so it was a way of dialoguing with one another, and interviews was part of my growing up, in how people learned, how people would connect, and not overtly religious, meaning it was through your actions and through your thoughts. And so this contra mundum idea we were talking about before, I think captures it all, because I exist in a space that I think is in the world, but not of the world. And I think that's Paul's position.
And is that kind of what you think? Is that a common thread that runs through all the different work you've done?
Yeah, I didn't plan that. I just figured out like, oh, that's where it fits. And it also fits in all the different spheres. So if I'm in a religious circle, I feel I'm positioned where I'm in the world of ideas, like engage the Gentiles, right? Engage the outside world, but on terms of ideas, not in devotion or not apologetic. I'm not coming from a faith position to convince them. I'm coming from, here's your ideas and here are mine. I think this is very Thomistic to do this, by the way, is you engage the world on its own terms, but you offer the position of a Christian perspective. But when you offer your Christian perspective, if you're thinking artistically, it's a sacramental worldview. You believe stories are the metaphor, right? I mean, we ask God, who is he? And he gives us Jesus on a cross. It's a dramatic.
Or we ask Jesus to understand things and he gives us a parable, parables are really strange stories. I mean, that you have to interpret and you have to go home and contemplate, I mean, parables
exactly
are hard,
on the money. It's a story.
Yeah.
And also Jesus doesn't say, think with me. He says, follow me. So it's an act, mimesis in Greek. So it literally is the act of being a Christian that you learn what being a Christian is, not thinking about Christianity correctly. So all these things in some crazy synthesis way, and we can unpack them if you want, I've learned to say, like, in the space of narrative, which few people understand from even a scientific point of view, namely poetics, Aristotle's poetics, that this model is so underused, and meanwhile, the whole liturgy is based on, the whole act of the liturgy is based on it's a play. You're acting out a play, a passion play, if you will. Yes. And everything is organized in the world. And people would like to believe that we live in the world of ideas and doctrine. No one lives that way. No. Now, that's an argument to be had when you go back to the laboratory and it's the research and development time. And you're saying to other people, how'd you get to what you're thinking and what are your sources? But we don't live our lives that way. And most people get captured by good stories.
I was at Latin Mass last night with a couple of my kids, and it was a glorious feast day. And, our pastor who says just the most beautiful Novus Ordo, but also Latin Mass. And I just always noticed that whenever they're in the Latin Mass setting, the way he walks around the altar and the way he turns his body and the way they bow and the way they just do everything, some might look at it and say, well, that's so robotic and artificial. And I'm looking at it and saying, this Tridentine Rite Mass, it's the most beautifully choreographed play ever conceived by man. And we've been doing this, for many, many centuries, and it kind of didn't freeze in time, but it was kind of perfected hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and it's still playing out. And so when I see these priests doing what some might be considered overly ritualistic movements and how they do things, I'm looking at it and saying, well, look at what we do in military processions. And if the President of the United States was coming into the building, look at how everybody would perform in a certain way, And it's a performance in the sense of it's this beautifully perfected ritual over centuries by the greatest minds and hearts and saints of the church. And the liturgy today, since you brought up the liturgy, it has been so watered down to where it's like the center of the attention is the celebrant, and he just makes it up as he goes along. We've done away with so many of those constraints and it's like, imagine a Broadway play that's hardly choreographed. It loses something. We need to be choreographed because that shows the reverence and the beauty of it. Sorry, I got off on that.
No.
But you talked about liturgy.
You go. I'll have another question in a minute.
But the whole expression of the Christian life is like that, and that's
a drama.
It's a drama.
Totally a drama.
Thank you. And that, and it's I think the perfect version of the drama is the liturgy. And so I just was commenting on that. It's a great way to see life.
And I think, frankly, a lot of Catholic liturgies, and it should be ancient, and it should always develop from this rich history. I think that's the beauty of Catholicism, is that on some level it's old. It's things that last, and it progresses on itself. I don't mean that like from a political point of view. It learns from what it learns. It's like when people say, why did the doctrine of Mary come up in the 18th century? It wasn't just came up. I mean, the seeds go back to the Bible, the antecedents, Jewish thinking, so it grows over time. But that's the beauty of Catholicism, is that it's not a soundbite. It's not a quick fix. I heard someone say the modern liturgy, kind of like the priest becomes a game show host, which I thought was a bit excessive, but it does feel that way. I don't know if you're aware of this, but even the shape of the church with Mass, it's a ship.
Yes.
So it's a ship. So I always thought if the captain of the ship is the priest for the liturgy, doesn't he point to where you're going? Like, why is he looking at us? Like, drive the boat. Like, where are you going? Yeah. And Cicero would always
There's an iceberg up there.
Yeah.
Look that way.
You're leading us somewhere. You're not entertaining us. You're leading us. And by the way, if you're leading us and we're behind you, we're looking all together for what the important part is, not you. Even the priest as the authority figure. We're looking ahead. When he turns to you, then he becomes the focus, and it kind of absorbs, I think, a missing metaphor for why we're there. We're in a ship sailing to a common mission, and he's our leader at that moment, presenting the miracles, but he's not there to entertain us.
You know what storytellers really understand, whether they're novelists or they're filmmakers, is that they understand the power of language, and the exact way to phrase something it makes all the difference in the world, whether it works or not, right? But I see like we get the language wrong. So when they talk about the priest turning towards us, they or when they say ad orientem, they say, well, the priest turned his back to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that is
it's such a judgment in the language. Yeah.
It's a misleading representation of he's leading us somewhere. And we're all facing the east, where the return of Christ will be one day. And that's why we're facing east together.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I need to start doing this again, but one of my sons, I would send him outside every morning and tell him to go look east right as the sun was coming up. Say, tell me if you see Jesus coming. but the power of language, storytellers understand that better than theologians. And this is why John Paul II, this artist, who John Paul II very well because of your work. We're going to talk about your documentary on him, which is awesome. It really was great. But artists understand the power of language, the power of presentation in a way that sometimes philosophers and theologians just miss.
How about artists understand the power of symbol?
Oh, yeah.
Because language is kind of halfway there, I think, because language participates in symbol.
You're right. Language is a symbol.
So metaphor would be, to me, I'm not correct.
No, you're right.
But the metaphor would be, because a metaphor harnesses like a parable, right? So let me tell you about the man with the seed. He plants in the same. By the way, I love that metaphor, just for a quick aside, because the seed didn't change. It's the soil. Did you ever think about that? The seed doesn't change. It's you're ready for the seed.
Readiness.
Yeah. So just in that metaphor alone, I just came to that conclusion. No one gave me a doctrine about it. I like the metaphor. That's why he said, let me tell you a parable, because change doesn't come. We don't change because of our minds. I think our minds are like eliminate the stupid, if that makes sense. But they're not. The heart's changed, not convert. We're not being transformed or metamorphosized by our minds. Our minds are. They're caution, they're checking the facts there, but that's not what we live for. We live for our passions and our who we are and our identity. And
I'm with you, man.
If you want to go theological, when people say in the Eastern thought or even in modern practices, they'll say like the divine is in you. No, that you're a piece of something, but you're participating in the divine.
Participation.
Yes.
So it's an Aquinas term, but the East, they have this. The notion of, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. What is it when they come? It's becoming, when like you're becoming God in the sense of, Athanasius said God became man so man can become God. Theosis, it's called, that's the word I'm looking for. The East, really, the Eastern Church Fathers, by the way, it's like 4% of the Catholic Church in worldwide is Eastern, but like,
I didn't know that.
It's only like 4%, but like 70% of our church fathers were Eastern. So it's something's lopsided there. But the East has that notion, it's called theosis, where we really become godlike in a very substantial way over time, as opposed to the West has a little bit more of an emphasis where we get holy and we develop a close relationship with God, a mystical union, a bridal union, which is beautiful, but there is a difference. Anyway.
Can I just jump in? Because I just thought of when I did my interview with Bishop Barron, and we talked about using the word Mashiach, for people. And he said, no, little messiahs. We all are little messiahs. I was bringing it up in the context. This to me was so key I haven't read anything yet where people understood that the power of John Paul II is in his dramatic background, his theatrical training.
Yeah.
Because that's not superficial. That's a language from so deep in, and especially when you're under communist and Nazi rule, and you've got to speak a language to communicate without being found out by the police or the SS or whatever.
Yeah.
But when I said to him, John Paul II is a modern messianic figure, because if you think about it, in Poland at the time, and still to a large degree today, the ethnic, the state, and the faith are all united together. So he was a position of the three. And if you go back in time, pre-Enlightenment, pre-Renaissance, the idea of the splitting between two spheres is not common to, like, we were talking about first century Bible, Jewish thinking. And it was the idea you were ethno-political. You were from Judea. That was your belief. That was your ethnicity. There's no separating, like, oh, now I'm doing academic, and now I'm doing ethnic, and now so the idea of being one in all these things is a real world embodiment of the truth. That's why he was so profound. The world could see him. And then TV exploded. So at the time, the medium was able to capture him. But if you take him out of his real context and he's just a thought figure, it doesn't have any impact. He's acting out.
I love it.
Yeah, he's acting out. And by acting, that's what the divine plan was about. He acted his faith. He knew faith must be demonstrated.
Well, the divine plan, so people know, that's your doc. Is there a book on that too?
There's a book called The Divine. So Paul Kengor wrote the original Pope and a President.
Pope and a President.
And I was at Grove City as part of a convention they were doing, and I heard him speak about them. And though he does cover it in the book was largely historical arc of the fall of the Cold War and communism. And I said, wow, there's something sweet right in there with the brotherhood of Reagan. Yeah. Because they're so different, but they have that one common thing, that they both knew suffering. They both had setbacks. The bond was so deep. And they both, privately to a large degree, and then publicly after they were almost killed, came to terms that, like, that was the difference. The faith aspect and the timeline had been condensed right in the face of death, that they both had spent the rest of their lives. But both of them were the leading actors in Hollywood and in the underground Polish theater in Poland during the oppression. Yeah. So when you come together and you could speak in those language about great acts, and he knew how to do it. He knew. I could tell you stories. You want to get into it at some point.
Both of them knew how to do it. And your documentary is great. I watched every minute of it, The Divine Plan, because I wanted to understand what your kind of angle was on this, and I saw it. It's the parallel. You build out this parallel between Ronald Reagan as a difficult childhood.
The Protestant Pope, by the way.
Protestant Pope, I like that. Saving kids, drowning, as a lifeguard, which I knew, and then John Paul II's biography, what he was working to protect Jews and all kinds of things. There's a lot of similarities in their tracks. They both love theater. Of course, Reagan was a famous actor. They both started taking on or suffering under communism. They both had persecutions, and I didn't know some of those Ronald Reagan persecutions that you.
I always thought that's the laboratory for what made Reagan a pure conservative, was when he was dealing with the unions and they were threatening his life. And
yeah. And they were like, he was like on a bus or something, and they started throwing rocks at him, and it was like
he was breaking the picket line. He and Holden, am I saying it right? Holden, the old actor. Westerns, and he was a great actor, but they were the only two guys on the bus under the seats.
They were kind of attacked. Yeah, I didn't know that story. And then, but another thing, just to kind of show
William Holden, he's a famous actor. Yeah,
it was like the other thing that you did great in convincing me in this documentary about the divine action here, because they both had a very similar assassination within 6 weeks of each other. Mm-hmm. The injury was far worse than public knew. They both came back with clarity of purpose about, we're going to defeat communism. It was amazing. I mean, the parallels are awesome. Mm-hmm. That was one of my favorite of your documentaries. Hey guys, real quick, we noticed 80% of you that watch the episodes are not subscribed. So please do me the favor and subscribe and hit the bell for notification. That helps you get the content, but it also helps this amazing stuff get spread to other people just like you. Thanks for your help. Now let's dive back in.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but the day John Paul II was shot was the day of Lady Fatima.
Oh yeah,
Lady
yeah.
Fatima. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
You
and
did
he was
know
actually,
that?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, John Paul II.
Yeah.
And so as he's reaching down, he actually saw, I think he saw Our Lady of Fatima on a little girl's shirt.
Interesting. I didn't know this.
Yes, yeah. Look this up. There's a little story of there was a young girl that had a picture of Our Lady of Fatima on her sweater or shirt or something, and he saw it and he started reaching, and as soon as he started reaching, boom, he got hit, and that's why the bullet missed his heart.
I should have put that in the film.
Sorry.
You're good.
Sorry.
You're good.
Yeah.
That's the redux.
Yeah. Right. No, it's amazing. And is it Our Lady of Fatima or Lourdes? It was
Our Lady of Fatima.
Fatima.
Yeah.
Okay. And I believe
I got to follow up with this. I'll tell you an amazing story.
The bullet that they took from him is
in her crown.
Yes, embedded in her crown in Fatima.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to Fatima with two of my teenage sons very soon, so we're going to be seeing that. I've seen it once before, 20 years ago.
So do you know the story of the three prophecies? And before he was shot,
like the three secrets of Fatima. Yeah.
So before he was shot, the church only allowed two to be known.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm the Pope. We're going to know the third one, and you know what the third one was?
Yeah, that the man in white was going to be killed or shot.
Bishop in white.
Bishop in white. Yeah.
In the middle, and then did you ever see the aerial photo of him in the middle of Rome?
No.
With the white hat and it's unbelievable. It's almost like someone saw the future and snapped it of that moment.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
We published a book called The Secret Life of John Paul II, and it's basically about how he discovered and realized that he was the man in the third secret of Fatima. It's kind of a cool story.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's cool.
And he also, that's where his dedication to Mary comes in also, because his mom died young. And do you remember when his father introduced him and said,
I didn't know it, and you taught me in the documentary. He took her, after the mother died, he took Carol Watiwa to churches or whatever, and would just sit in front of a statue and said, "This is your mother now," or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
It's beautiful.
So back to how an act could be powerful or a symbol. By doing that, he didn't like physically say anything. He just showed, here's in this symbol is what could replace what you've lost. And then he lost, and I say it in the film, but he lost everyone close to him. So he was a man of suffering. Yes. He was also a brilliant philosopher too.
All right. I want to go back though.
Back.
I mean, this was, I love talking about the Pope and the president, but I know that's Ken Gore's, by the way, Ken Gore's a great friend, a great author of Devil and Karl Marx with Tan. I mean, one of our best-selling books of all time. Shout out to Ken Gore. So
I never heard of him.
Yeah, right. So, but he stars in a couple of your documentaries, I think. So, but let's go back to the first one I watched on Patton. This was cool. Okay, who killed Patton? I know he got hit by the bus or by a big truck. That looks like a legitimate accident. And at least Patton certainly believed it was. But then he's paralyzed. Was he paralyzed?
He was.
Okay.
He was.
And then he dies. Who killed him? I want to know what Robert Orlando thinks about that.
Did you read the book?
No, I just watched the documentary.
I would love to do a follow-up at some point just of the forensic study of the crime scenes and how they were studied and what they did with all the evidence. I don't want to
crime scene of the car wreck or of the hospital?
Both, okay. Like from the point of accident to the point of death.
Okay,
like
so maybe you don't think so maybe the accident wasn't an accident. Oh, I saw it right there. I saw it right there.
No, but I think it's important. Sometimes, well, let me back up a second. Could there have been funny business to take Patton out? Absolutely. He was going to go back to the United States, both from the American and the
That was
Russian
my next
side.
question. Is it Stalin or Eisenhower? I saw it right there again.
Well, Patton was the most popular man in the country at the time, and he said, "I'm going to take the gag off, and he said, "I'm going to tell everybody what really happened during the war." And he did not like Eisenhower.
Yeah.
He respected him, but the truth was he saw him as an administrator. I don't know if you know this, but Eisenhower never led an actual battle.
I did not know that.
Never led a battle.
That's surprising.
Yeah. Well, think about a guy who lives in the battle, respecting someone who never, like a bureaucrat. But you can't. I mean, you can't. What he kept together is in a whole. You've got to give him so much credit, and you can't. I don't want to run by and take a drive-by shot on it. But when you get into their dynamics, and I read most of his journals about Eisenhower, but he was not a fan. He'd write to his wife all the time about it. So back to your point, do I think it's one or the other? I have like anecdotes that I think sometimes are more revealing. I said I knew I had to address it because it was in the room. all the time, like bringing up Patton. Well, who shot him was part of at least 15% of everyone I engaged on every level, audience, people who read whatever, were like, well, what do you think about being shot? So I had to address it. And there was other books coming out at the time, Killing Patton. No, O'Reilly did Killing Patton, but he took most of those ideas from an earlier writer. I can't think of his name now. It was another book like that where he was going for the conspiracy, and his brother was the source provider for him, who was a private detective who actually had the legitimate, he was a Marine, the guy that it's a long story, but Crazy Donovan was the guy who gave $10,000 to a guy, a Marine, and he was a black ops of the time called the Jedburghs. The Jedburghs become, I think, the CIA at some point. But he was hired, given $10,000, just shut Patton up. And he admitted this in D.C. years later and gave this source to the other writer. It'll come to me. But when he did, he gave him, and it was the confession of all this guy, but he found it to be like he went behind German lines, and he was like the kind of guy who could pull this off. But to answer your question, it's not a simple answer, because it's like the grassy knoll problem again, is sometimes the motivation to kill him is stronger than that. So my anecdote is, I'm writing the book, made the film. At certain points, people would call me, and I didn't know who they were, and they knew what I was doing, and they just wanted to tell me like an off the record story. And one guy called me who was under Patton. I got to tell you about my uncle in a second, but who was under Patton, and told me there were secret meetings between him and the communists, the Red Army, behind the scenes, never recorded. The army was told to keep their heads down. This is like on a phone call with a stranger, but he was pretty detailed, saying to me, they all had to keep their heads down to not see what they were seeing. But Patton would go in and meet with the Red Army and everything, because he was trying to settle scores and things outside of the known public. And there might have been some vindictiveness there with the Red Army and trying to take him out, because he was also a threat to them. And I don't know if you know the story that Stalin sent two guys to hitmen to go get John Wayne, because he was known as such an anti-communist American figure. No, I didn't know. And then John Wayne beat them up. But this is like borderline legend. You got to look into that yourself.
Oh, it's okay.
But it came to me.
It should be true. So,
yeah, exactly. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, so
John Wayne beat him up. That should be a movie.
No, it is.
I
said there's that's the problem. Like
two communists show up and John Wayne beats them up. Oh gosh.
Yeah, no. That's my point. Stories just feed on each other, because like why? Anyway, so back to your point. It's a long story. It's like a grassy knoll story. I just didn't think at the end, when you weighed the evidence, that would be the way to go about killing him. It was too high risk. You had to time a train. I get in the weeds, but you had to time a train going by, a crossing. General Gay, who was his buddy, had to be in the car, and he was the one who invited him to go hunting that day. Yeah. And there was a delay because Patton wanted to go see a site, and there was only one heater in the car, and he felt bad for his dog who was freezing the temperatures, and he changed seats to be with his thing. And then the guy who was the killer had to pin the window open when he went. It starts to get a little too much. Yeah. Like, why not? They had ways to kill him. They had him in their sights. The red could have. But the crazy thing about it, but to me, that wasn't the greatest story. Then he's rushed to the hospital, and he's brought to Mannheim, which was there was a closer hospital. He's brought to Mannheim because they had the best care and whatever. But he winds up in there, and it's true that people were disguising themselves as nurses and aides to go closer to the bed. But he had like the 24-hour watch nurse. Like I don't think they needed to kill him. I think what happened.
Well, before you answer that, what's the death certificate say his cause of death was?
I think he had a complication toward the end. I forget. He was about to be released. This is what makes it even more conspiratorial. He called home. He was packing, and I don't know if you know this, but he was kept with fish hooks, pinned like for days and days, like some ridiculous thing where he couldn't move. You can imagine the state he was in. And toward the end, I think they'd give him a little scotch for circulation and whiskey for circulation or whatever. But I think he had a recovery. They thought he was going to come back. I think they took the hooks out, and he was starting to recover. And then he had some kind of a a collapse of, I think it was his lungs or something, where he eventually had an episode and died. So,
but the question is did somebody spur that on while he was in the hospital? I mean, that's the question.
That's why I meant you could hit the conspiratorial point at the crash site, or you could hit it at the hospital.
And at
you
the
could
hospital,
say someone
would it
took
be
advantage.
poison? Would it be poison?
Yeah, something like that. Or they knew he was going home, and all the bad stuff would still happen, and someone got smuggled. I mean, it's proved that the people were smuggled in there. But I'm just saying, to get to him alone, isolated, and put some poison in him, possible, yeah. Okay. I just didn't think they needed to do it that way, because you have a guy on a battlefield. Oops.
Would you put your money more on the Soviets doing it or the U.S. government doing it?
Wow. How much time do we have? I'm going to keep saying it. You'd have to think in a pretty dark way about our government and Eisenhower to accept that he was set up. But I could understand why he was a Trumpian figure. If you think about this.
I did think about that. When I was watching, I was like, there's a lot of similarities here with Trump.
I mean, if we take the politeness off this, I mean, he was a cantankerous, troubled, depressive, he could only fight. Yeah. He was a genius at fighting. He was a Renaissance man when it came to warfare, but he could not function in everyday life. Mm-hmm. He talked too much, didn't know when to shut up, said too many words, didn't have that. But a guy who's killing for a career. Do you expect him to be like safe with his language, discipline? But what he said was absolutely right. And I wrote the book not for the conspiracy part, but he became a prophet of the Cold War to come.
Yeah.
He could have saved the lives of maybe that 40 to 100 million.
100 million.
100 million we quote all the time. He at least would have given the Eastern Bloc a chance for democracy. And he felt like we fought half the war and they pulled him out of there.
He saw it all along. That's the fascinating thing I learned about it is he saw, why are we aligning with the Soviet Union? Stalin's worse than any of them. And then he had an opportunity to go and try to run them through. He wanted to invade, and he wanted to give them some kind of...
He wanted to get to Czechoslovakia, and he had Winston Churchill behind him too.
And if he had done that, the argument goes that 100 million people might not have been lost to the Soviet Union over the next how many years?
I'm not sure if the number encompasses other regions, but at least we know he would have pushed. I think it's fair to say if you let Patton go and there was some kind of discipline to his aggression, which is risky, high risk, and to Eisenhower's credit, he still has to fight in the Pacific. The war's not over.
That's a good point.
He's got to go there, and he's also knows Soviets lost 23 million now is the record, 24 million, and we lost 400,000 men. So you talk about like respecting some, like, and this is even in Putin's head right now when you think about who won World War II. If for anyone who delves into this, you're going to see, yes, Patton was an incredible general. Yes, he raced across into Normandy and across France and got to the Battle of Bulge, which was to me like crossing of the Delaware level accomplishments. But in the end, it was a cleanup crew. I mean, Hitler had lost at Stalingrad. And it was the Soviets just throwing bodies at the German juggernaut that actually wore them down. And we were feeding them trucks and ammunition, and a lot of rings true to Ukraine and that's some other thing. But we ran them to the ground, but you couldn't defeat the Germans straight on. Yeah.
What was it like working with Victor Davis Hanson? I'm a huge fan. I listen to his podcast all the time. I think he's brilliant. And he was like your main guy or one of your main guys in that documentary.
I told him I went to see him out in Pepperdine. And I had read his books, and I'm a bit of a classicist too, and a military, I would say selective military historian. I don't like to drop these big words. Like, am I in certain areas, Revolutionary War, World War II, and I said I won't do this unless you do it. No pressure, but I won't do it. But what I love about Victor Davis Hanson is he's timeless.
He is.
So he'll talk to you about events now, but he's sitting in his mind, and he's got this incredible photographic, it's amazing. But he'll just transition in the middle of a sentence or a paragraph between modern German invasion and like Caesar going into Trier, like in the same sentence. And you're like, I'm with you, keep going. I got you totally. And so I felt the freedom of someone who thought contextually, like not just an ideologue or someone who just knew so many specifics about one deeper dive. So when you think that way, it gives you perspective. And that's what he gave to this, because he saw the way I did. He saw Patton is an incredibly flawed, this was his opinion about Trump too, by the way, like incredibly flawed, necessary figure at a time. And that's what my position was. And I said, you're the only one who's going to hold the same position as me going into this. And yeah, he was great.
Incredibly flawed, but necessary. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
John, I would say John the Baptist, not Jesus.
Yeah. Wow.
What'd you expect? He eats
Why
locusts.
why is John the Baptist incredibly flawed? He wasn't flawed.
Locusts? He's eating locusts? And
It was penance. He wasn't flawed.
okay.
Peter was flawed. Peter was the incredibly flawed but necessary. So I'm a big John the Baptist fan, by the way. So any which way.
Are you being half sarcastic?
No,
there?
I think
you don't think John the Baptist is flawed?
No.
Wow.
Okay. No. I mean, I think he was, and in fact, the tradition of the church is that this guy, basically had incredible grace infused at the moment of the visitation, right? So Mary walks in, pregnant Mary confronts pregnant Elizabeth. Elizabeth feels the child stir in her womb. And right then, incredible grace was flown into John the Baptist, and he lived essentially sinless, perhaps. I don't know. I think that's the tradition throughout the rest of his life. And so he was the voice in the wilderness, as prophesied by Isaiah, to bring in the Messiah, which is what he did for Christ. But so his going after, Herod, living this very ascetic lifestyle, as many of the church fathers did. I think that I don't see flaw in that. I see that as like introducing the New Testament to a penitential life, the new covenant, to the new baptism that we were going to have. I see him as, and Jesus, by the way. I mean, you can call him if you're critical of him, you got to be careful, because Jesus said that there is no man greater born of woman than John the Baptist.
I don't know if he meant. I don't. Okay. I mean,
how would you say he was incredibly flawed? What do you mean?
Well, let me go back.
There's not that many lines in Scripture.
If we have a theme here, we were talking about how stories and narratives work. Okay, so traditionally, in like the archetype of stories, the reason why you need John the Baptist to go to Jesus, because you need the prophet figure. Okay, like pure prophet, like doesn't clean, doesn't eat, doesn't do X, Y, and Z. He's like flawed, meaning it's kind of messy the way they do their thing. You could argue Paul's like this too, to some degree. They're messy. They don't carry the saint, like the usual characteristics of the saint. Doesn't mean they can't be a saint. I understand where that goes. But at the time, so I see him as, because Jesus, like, what did you expect? What do you say? A reed floating in the ocean? Like, it's the very toughness and the lack of polish. That's the same focus vision that he doesn't care that makes him the prophet. Like, you can't separate the two. So Patton, by the way, one of the things I learned in retrospect about my own career, to tie it back in a little bit, is that I keep finding these enigmatic characters. And I ask myself, why? Am I one? Like, what's familiar in them?
Yeah, why do you find them attractive?
Exactly. Do I have a problem? Well, we know that. We know I have problems. That's a given. And we know I have contradictions. But I figured it out finally. Enigmatic figures make great, interesting figures, because there's two sides to them always feeding on each other. And they're not just one thing. So, and because they never figure themselves out completely, they're working through their stuff, but in that Dostoevsky, I mean, go on to all of them, even the characters we've named. So Patton's a tormented individual, tormented guy. He's so interesting because he's tormented. I mean, so I go back to that. I think John the Baptist fits right in that slot of, you need that. The end is coming.
Yeah, but you just said tormented. How can you say, what about John the Baptist was tormented? Don't confuse eccentricity with tormented or I mean, so he's extremely, I forget the word we were originally talking about, like, flawed, incredibly flawed, but extremely eccentric. And I think there was probably reasons for that. I mean, he was the first of the desert fathers, but I mean, St. Anthony of the Desert would have been extremely, anyway. But
let's get this out in the open here. So are you saying they're never flawed, or like Bible characters, or are you just like
no.
Okay.
No, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think Scripture shows us, I think Jesus shows us that Peter himself was extremely flawed, but necessary. We had to have the church built upon a successor of Christ on this planet, and that's what the primacy of Peter is. Extremely flawed man. He jumps out of the boat and he sinks. I'll never deny you. He denies him 3 times within 12 hours. That's the incredibly flawed individual. But I don't see anything in Scripture that actually points to John the Baptist being flawed. Oh, highly eccentric? Oh, yeah. A public, outcast? Oh, yeah. But not flawed. Flawed to me kind of means sinful. And I'm not seeing the sin in John's life. I don't mean it that way. Then. I
didn't mean it that way.
Yeah. I think that's the difference. It's
lacking polish, messy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm seeing that flawed, not like flawed, condemned sinner.
Bingo.
I'm not seeing that.
I'm with you.
Okay.
Messy? Oh,
yeah.
He's the king of
he
messy.
Probably stunk.
Oh, yeah.
And he probably didn't care about his words either. I mean,
we're on the same page.
Yeah.
I mean, flawed in the sense of, from a worldly standpoint, messy, disheveled, confusing, creating chaos, disruptive.
How about obnoxious?
Yes.
And people not liking to be around him. Okay, so
there you go.
Paul too. By the way, they're in good company.
Yeah. But you see, I guess I was meaning flawed more as like sinful, and because
not a condemning flawed, not like he's stuck in his sin and he didn't see what. No, I mean, but prophets are tough people.
And actually, when you're talking about like that messy, causing problems. The great characters in the church. We just filmed recently with one of the world experts on St. Francis of Assisi. Same thing.
Oh, totally.
What a mess.
Totally.
What a mess.
You think of him with the flowers and the animals coming around and no, you have no idea.
Well, he was a mess.
Saints notoriously.
He stripped naked in town. Dude, put some clothes on, man. He's a weird dude. He's a totally weird. He went up and embraced a leper. To Catherine of Siena drank the water from a bowl that was used to bathe a leper. Who does that? I mean, so sometimes these saints
I rest my case.
Are very messy people.
Well, how about this? So let's tie. I'm going to keep trying to tie this into the layers of the artist, the thinker, the believer, or the faith, the 3 spheres here. So when you think about it, I would argue that when you speak the word saint, you whisper the word madness of some kind.
I love that.
So you whisper madness.
Agree.
Okay.
Yes.
When you whisper an artist, you whisper madness.
I see it.
When you whisper enigmatic, disruptive figures, is a madness to it. So when people are coming at this, and I guess this is where I position it, like these are polished individuals that floated down from somewhere or got the light, and then that Paul was an ethnic cleanser. That's what he did. And he ran the temple police to do it. So if you looked at him and he said, well, I had a vision. You did? Why do you think Peter and James doubted his authority? We kind of knew Jesus. We talked with him. We had bread with him. We did. What about you? Oh, no. I saw it all in the vision. He told me you guys are not doing it right. Just think about the confrontative nature of these figures, but they changed the world.
Yeah.
Even back to Trump again, they changed the world, even though if you stop to analyze what they're doing, it's messy.
Yes.
It's really messy.
Yes. I love that you would whisper madman.
Yeah.
Yes.
You would. It's
I agree
right there.
Completely.
Right there in your brain.
And I want my wife to listen to this episode. There's a little bit of madman in me, and she knows
There better be. I'm in good company. I feel safer now. Yeah.
I love that. That was a beautiful segment. Whatever it is, we need to make that a clip. That was really good. There's a little bit of madman in the saint. Contra mundi, right back to what we were saying, right?
Because I mean, are you familiar with Hamlet at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Time is out of joint.
Mm-hmm.
If ever, oh cursed spite, if ever I was born to set things right. That fits into all these characters.
Yes.
It's the great man theory, Thomas Carlyle. It's the how you set up a tragedy well. I think to some degree, Marx saw himself that way, frankly. I think that's why he interests me. It's even in his illusions, people are interesting because it doesn't mean they have the answers. But even in his ambitious, he was a prophetic figure. He was a radical prophetic figure. And he came from, I think, a deeply spiritual, troubled place. So he wasn't like sitting in a room as a philosopher. As a matter of fact, he was a bad philosopher. So he's like a derivative character. One of the reasons I reached the spiritual entry point for him was I learned he was totally derivative. I thought it was his ideas that were unique. There's nothing original about Karl Marx. His economy is. You want to go here? Or you want?
I want to wait on Karl Marx. I want to get to the Shroud.
Okay.
And I guess we covered John Paul II and Ronald Reagan, which is a great episode. And Paul Kangor is your main guy in that
Well,
one.
they are sequenced if you think about it. So, Patton is the bookend, and the first bookend, and then in the Silence Patton, and then the book is the tragedy of Patton. That's my book, and then the other bookend is a Divine Plan with the book The Divine Plan,
Right.
because one is warning about the Cold War to come. He's saying you're going to be fighting the Russians for 50 years here. Let's leave the army and let's keep one Panzer division in the closet with the intelligence, because they know how to beat the Reds, which is why he got in trouble and fired and everything. One of the reasons. But he was trying to say you can't blame them, because to be a Nazi at the time was like us choosing to be a Democrat that's got him fired too.
That was a very rational explanation that Patton really tried. He understood. Like
They had no choice.
They had no choice. That's like when they talk about Ratzinger was a Hitler Youth, and like the left kind of grabbed onto that. Have you heard about that? So Ratzinger, as a child, was a Hitler Youth, and people freaked out about it. Well, it's like being part of the Boy Scouts. I mean, it was just the culture that they were in. Like, how can he wasn't anti-Jewish. You know what I mean? So
no, but this is my point. When you want to go out of the ideas of how we're supposed to think correctly about things into the messy part. That's when I think you're into tragedies and stories and contradictions and all. I always say when we go back to that milieu with the Nazis, I don't think of it as the SS guy. I think of it as like the security guard at one of the camps who's got 5 kids.
Yeah.
And he doesn't eat, and that family doesn't eat. I'm not justifying this in any kind. I'm just saying. No. But just think of that guy. Like did you know that Rommel was an evangelical Christian?
No.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, I've talked a lot about that, in one of my books called If Aristotle's Kid Had an iPod. It's about how Aristotle would give parenting advice today. But one of the things that I really looked into actually in that is the Nuremberg trials. And I studied how did these men become these horrific Nazis doing these terrible things? And have you heard of the Milgram experiment?
No.
Okay, something you should look up. It's amazing. You can look it up on YouTube. But Stanley Milgram was a psychologist that was watching the Nuremberg trials unfold on TV, and he was a Jewish guy and a psychologist from some Ivy League school. And he's sitting there saying, how did they do this? I mean, they started off as just little German kids, going to good, probably Christian schools, having dinner every night with their families, went and got a good education. And before you know it, they're a Nazi in charge of concentration camps. What the hell happened? So Stanley Milgram did this experiment where he found just like average people off the street, and he set them up in an experiment to where they were delivering shocks, or the subject of it was delivering shocks to somebody in a memory experiment. Now, there was
like a Pavlov's dog.
Yeah. Well, it was a fake situation where there was an actor, and so they thought the participant, the subject, delivering shocks to a person with ever increasing voltage if the person gives the wrong answer. Now that person's in another room, but he can hear the subject who's delivering the shocks hears the scream of the person. Ow, that hurts! Stop! Let me out! And then the doctor says, no, you must continue with the experiment. And the idea is this subject, who's just a regular plumber, electrician, or whatever right off the street, participating in a quote-unquote memory experiment, is delivering these shocks. The experiment was, if a doctor in a white coat with a clipboard tells you to deliver a shock, a stronger shock, how many people would actually deliver what they believe to be a lethal shock that can kill someone, a lethal shock to a perfect stranger, simply because a doctor in a white coat with a clipboard told you to? And the answer was staggering. It was like 60% of people would do something that they were afraid was going to kill someone, simply because an authority figure. So it's called the Stanley Milgram experiment.
I didn't hear the name, but I know of the experiment.
It's one of the most famous experiments ever, because it shows our human nature desperately seeks to follow authority. And the reason it's in a parenting
permanence
book,
if you go to evolution.
Yeah,
sure. Permanence.
And so when I'm talking to families, I'm sitting there saying, listen, your kid if you ask yourself, would my kid ever be a Nazi? Well, the parents of Nazis never thought that their kids would be Nazis. So don't think that you're immune to this. We are social creatures. Zoon politikon by Aristotle means political animal. Zoo, you can hear zoon politikon. We're political animals, social animals. And so the desperate need to just follow the crowd. There's just and so you have these guys who end up becoming Nazi soldiers. It's just a political party at the time. Hitler's elected by, he's elected. And then it goes crazier and crazier and crazier, and they end up doing horrifically evil things. My point is don't think that you are immune to that. Your children, your kids can be subject to that. But Patton, to bring it back to when in your documentary, when you're showing that Patton, he has to help put back together the German society after it's been ravished by the war, and and I think the White House issues, command saying you can't work with anybody that was affiliated with the Nazi party. And he's like, that's impossible. Everyone here was. And besides, they're the only ones that know how to run anything. So we have to let them. So it's interesting.
They're the infrastructure.
The infrastructure.
Yeah. And his job as governor of Bavaria was to feed the people.
Right.
So he didn't have the sewers, the electricity, and there's no infrastructure. The dumb politicians, as usual, are virtue signaling back home to get elected and keep power. And same thing today about it. Nothing has changed. Human nature does not change, period. And we're not enlightened at all. But if you go back to him at that time, he was thinking of the people. He was like, we're done with the war. They're not enemies. We have to, there's so much to say there, but yeah.
So he had just a clear understanding that, listen, the war's over. I beat the crap out of them during the war. But now that the war is over, all good. Let's put the German people back together. I mean, your document really helped me see that Patton was, in that regard, a good guy. He just wanted to get this thing back together, and it was actually the politicians that made the after-war recovery far harder than it needed to be.
Yeah, before the Marshall Plan, there was the Morgenthau Plan. Are you familiar with that? Which was to basically blow Germany back to like agrarian society, take all the machines away, put them back with the horses and the carts, and so that goes back to World War I. Trying to Treaty of Versailles and the whole thing, that they were trying to punish the Germans for many, many years, and kind of I wouldn't say created Hitler, but gave him the fertile soil to start hitting those notes, and he knew how to hit them. He also he was a former veteran from World War I in communications, and so just to wrap that back into this other conversation. So there's like the conversations you receive at the ideological level, but even today, most encounters I've kind of unplugged from most things. I'm selective with the podcast. I don't watch regular television anymore. I just can't take it because all of them, at least in my evolution, I'm getting older now, but got the grace to prove it. But in my evolution of thought and trying to engage the culture, and I'm a media guy too, so I understand how the media works. But you see, people talk in other people's wishes all day long. They talk from other people's wishes. They've already been trained to talk because that's how they eat. That's how they get red meat in front of the camera. That's how they feed. So power always uses people's need to belong places. Like, are you left? Are you right? Are you center? Are you right? Are you right? Tell me what you believe. Virtual signaling and picking sides is still playing out today. Like, why do we all think this way? Because someone else benefits from us being against each other and all the noise. And so, again, as a storytelling, you always say, where is the antecedents to this? Because you're just treating the surface. You're joining the crowd. I think the artist, the thinker, the independent type mind is going below it and saying, we got to get down one layer below that. Even back to Hamlet, you remember? He says, I'm going to crawl under the underground even deeper than your crawl, because the soldiers would crawl on the ground, dig pits to go under the walls of the castles. He's like, I'm going to dig one even deeper than your holes to get underneath you. But he's making the point in thought sometimes you got to go deeper than the accepted knowledge, accepted wisdom. It's always being overturned. And that's seen through Catholic evolution and theologians through history. Thomas Aquinas was originally a heretic, remember?
Thomas Aquinas?
Yeah.
How so?
The church thought he was a heretic for a while.
On like what?
He brought Aristotle, and Aristotle
was
was the Marx of his time.
Right. That was he was the tool. He was the tool of the
he would have been the
Muslims
Marx.
of the Muslims. Really, yes. No, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Now Aristotle was kind of the weapon of of the Islamic philosophers. In fact, the Islamists are the ones that translated
Right.
Aristotle into Latin so that Aquinas could read it. They didn't translate Plato, and so he didn't really read Plato unless it was through Augustine's Latin or Aristotle's Latin. So no, I understand.
It's deeper than that. It's more the Platonic strain that's been in Christian thinking that's always been there between Paul and the apostles in the scholastic approach or king versus prophet. There's always been this dichotomy, but the Platonic strain that comes because, Luther is an Augustinian monk.
Yes.
So he's bringing a heavy Platonic anti-thinking, anti-reason. The body's bad. It's consumed with sin. It's not like corrupted with sin. And so bringing Aristotle back in was re-entering the natural order because he was a naturalist. Aristotle, Plato was an idealist.
Yes.
So he's living in a world that may or may not be true, and you need to hope for it, but you can't live in that world. So he's also correcting Augustine and a whole history of Christianity by bringing Aristotle back into it as a tool, not just to debate the other religions.
Was it a correction or an addition?
A correction. Oh no, he definitely corrected. I mean, he did both. He took and integrated. Augustine is, of course, the main thinker coming that way through the medieval times. But it was a correction back because he was bringing this world back into the conversation. So reason is not out of the question. It's just limited. It needs to, we believe, so we learn. He was trying to say there's enough of the natural order to learn things prior to the step of faith that you may not know God intimately, the God of the Bible or Revelation, but doesn't mean you can't know anything. Mm-hmm. And I think he was fighting back against the Platonic strain. And this mystical strain goes through all of the church through history. And I think it winds up being in the Protestant movement and in evangelicalism today. It's always off the ground. You're always going away from the real earth.
Well, talking about art,
the reason I brought it up is because I think art brings you back to the earth. Like real things matter. The symbols you do, where you walk, how you talk is physical. It's your body. You're putting the sensual back in the foreground of like what we should be paying attention to as divine.
The school of Athens art, Raphael, right?
Yeah.
You walk into and you got Plato pointing above and you got Aristotle pointing down, and that kind of summarizes everything you're saying right there. Again, the picture's worth 1,000 words right there.
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
You want to talk about the Shroud?
Sure.
Okay, so I watched that over the last couple of days. Finished it last night. It's interesting because that kind of, I see the Patton makes sense. You got the divine plan because you're dealing with the Cold War. Now you got Karl Marx. There's like these connections between those three. I can almost see them like a trilogy, And I haven't seen some of you've done some others which I haven't been able to see. But the Shroud is, in my mind, it's like outside of those three. It's just different. But tell me, you did talk about your father's death, I believe, and that was a motivation or a spark that pushed you to do this. Tell us a little bit about what drove you to do a documentary on the Shroud, and what the whole experience was for you in going through this, and then also has it changed your faith in terms of your recognition of our Lord's passion, because you go in pretty deep into what this passion was all about. So talk about that.
So it's the Shroud of Turin, but it's the Shroud face to face. So in my thinking, I was approaching it again slightly differently. In the real world, the story was I had no interest in the Shroud whatsoever. I think faith is hard enough, living this life and competing with the forces. And growing up again, Italian Catholic, there is a thorn, a cross, a piece of the cross. There is symbols and all that mystery stuff everywhere all the time. And when you have so much of it, you realize you have to be really selective with how you focus. So to me, I was not someone who would seek something like that out, the symbolic shroud, to figure it out. But I had some Hollywood friends they were really into the Shroud, and they knew people, they knew that whole network. And they were kind of asking me, have you ever thought about doing something on the Shroud? Have you ever thought about it? And I was like, no. And then finally, my father died, and it kind of, how do you explain it when you lose somebody, and sometimes it just makes things clearer, condenses time, because you realize how short time is, and you almost like focus your thoughts and maybe things that you'd say, well, I'll get to that down the road or whatever. And I was at a place, I also went back to Princeton at the time to pick up on my studies of Apostle Paul that I had left behind years ago. So I was in like a reflective state, but I realized that as a filmmaker, at some point I have to make it real through the products I make, the choices I make for subject matter. And I said, the idea of going after this, and my filter was, if I go after this and I find out it's not true, I'm going to say it. Like I'm going to go where the truth leads me. I'm not going to go on a journey where I know what it is in advance. And then not be honest about where I went. And I'll be fair about it, but I'm not going to tell you something I don't believe. So I went on the journey, and I'm a pretty good study early. We're like getting patterns out of reading all the key books, and there was so much to read. You could spend the rest of your life on the Shroud. I mean, there is such an audience and so much analysis going on. So what I have to come up with certain narrative approaches. Mine was, what if you just went to the cross as a crime scene? And this is your forensic evidence. The Shroud is the forensic evidence left behind, that they put the yellow tape around, Jerusalem and Golgotha and all that. So my first thought was, has anyone done a police investigation purely like CSI meets the cross? Like just saying, and the Shroud is the forensic evidence. And now if you have blood proof of it, you're really getting close to the blood drops in a crime scene. And so that was the first thing. What if you made the cross the crime scene? And this is the evidence. Let's look at through that lens, because then you get to use the Bible as context, the characters involved, And I just set it up and I studied like how a crime scene's done and organized the material. I said, I will take these 7 to 10 steps, witnesses, forensic possibilities, and I'll get all the experts and go through it. And little by little, somewhere along the line, and I had read pretty heavily, and again, like I could condense information pretty quickly to see what the patterns or the tracks are to go on. And I found like the 7 arguments that had to be won or lost to get you to the point of believing, meaning from a point of evidence, from like a good Thomist would, like what can you defend here and make a case for, just in pure science? Because I was coming at it like the skeptics outrightly dismiss all of Christianity, and they dismiss the Shroud as part of that. And I was coming at it, no, I'm going to treat it like science, because they would have quashed this years ago if they really had something to, like, black and white, like open and shut case to shut it out of being a possible real real item. But so I started to, and I was like, no, that's at least 50-50. Nope. Then I started going through argument, like in the case of the blood, and the blood had the evidence and the enzymes of someone who was tortured, like extremely tortured. And then I knew the Bible really well, of like how crucifixions were done by the Romans, and the fact that all the blood and everything are like in perfect whipping style of the way Romans whipped from either side, and then yank the little cannonballs with the 9 cat of 9 tails. I forgot what but like the whole idea was all evidential in it. So they told me to come out to this rustic Shroud Center out in Southern California, Orange County area. And they were just setting up a replica of the Shroud exhibit. And I went in there, and as a filmmaker and where I'm at and all I've studied now I'm open to what can happen. And they went into a dark room, and I kind of captured this in the beginning of the film, but I went into a dark room, and for the first time, they took the image, but lit it from behind. Like lights came on behind it. Now you're looking at a negative. And as a filmmaker and a photographer, you have to understand, for me, like years of looking at images, their pixelation and detail level. First thing was that's way too many details to be phony. It's just too specific. There's too many things going on. And then I saw the face of Jesus, and I was like, my brain went like, Bible, there, Roman history, and I was like, and now I just looked at his face, and I was like, oh, I see. This story is an encounter with Jesus, not a symbol of him. It's a signifier. The Shroud to me became the signifier of putting you back in Jerusalem in the crime scene. So I said to myself, now that's my journey. My journey is not to prove only this, but so where I came to was, I didn't expect this, but it made sense when I reached it. And that was, in the end, to find the truth of the shroud is to find the truth of Jesus. So it's not a quest of science, it's a quest of moral challenge. Because what do you do with this? If that's true, and he suffered like this, how do you make sense of this when he becomes the figure that subverts all power and then winds up influencing the entire Western civilization? Like, what do you make of it, skeptic? How do you explain it? I don't care. You could say it any terms you want. Make sense of that. How would something phony? So it became a challenge to break down the arguments, but ultimately take this face to face. And I don't know if you remember in the film, I finally get to the Turin church and I'm in there in the big, it's like Wizard of Oz moment, like I'm going up the aisle and you see
the big face of the
shroud.
Shroud.
Which was a high resolution scan of the actual shroud. You couldn't reach it because the oxygen couldn't touch it. It was in a case that I also saw. But right at that moment when I saw that, I said, wow, I'm not at the end of this story. I need to go to Jerusalem. I need to go to the crime scene. And that's when I said, I've never been to the Via Dolorosa. It was 120 degrees. I could tell you, if we have time and you want to know more, please ask me questions there. The events that happened and all the things I went through to actually just shoot that scene and everything.
Was this like you and one camera guy? Or like, what did you
No,
have to
no, it
what
was
did you
a
have
crew.
to take? What did you have to take to the Holy Land?
I had to get. I didn't take it. I had crews there, and I was like the director of crews, like
Okay, so
Israeli crews.
you can rent crews there.
Yeah.
Good.
So, and I just said, there's no way this story's told, because what would you do? It's like the cop who can't figure it out in the good story, and like it's late at night and he can't take it anymore. He's in bed and he gets up and he goes to the scene himself, and it's almost like he looks around and wants to overturn the things one more time because he's gone. Before this gets closed, and it's like I can't figure it out. That was what I felt like. I have to go put my feet in where Jesus walked to know like what was going on. And that was amazing. That was the most amazing experience. And I'm directing a crew. I got a 150-pound cross on my shoulder.
Yeah, you carried that cross around
2 days in a row.
Did you really? You were sweating.
with sciatica.
Was that sweat real?
You go. And the other thing
you were dripping wet in that thing. I was,
There was no.
You weren't spraying yourself down.
Okay. Try carrying a cross at 120 degrees with humidity through the roof, and not only that, but just carry the cross, because a lot of it is stairs going up and down. So one nice woman came up to me afterward, and I wasn't thinking this way because I promised myself I would debate. I was debating scientists and doing events with the screenings after the film came out, and she said, going through all that, did something touch you? Like, with Jesus, like directly? Did you, And I said, I've been so disciplined about this. Number one, I got to direct the film. So you realize on some level I'm trying to act to make a point, but also and be sincere about it. But I'm also directing, and you're in Jerusalem. You've been to Jerusalem?
No, never been to the Holy Land.
Okay.
I really want to.
Okay. It feels like a tinderbox. I'm from New York, where you kind of have that sense of thing, like your dander's up. Like that was like, you go to this street, and Father Dalton told me he went to that street and he gets spit on, and so I'm like doing all this, the hostility level, the lack of control. It's a Muslim town. Okay, I'm walking around with a cross, like in a Muslim town. Okay,
Yeah.
So
Why were you walking around with the cross?
Because I was reenacting. I did a rehearsal.
You did the whole way of the cross.
The whole way of the cross, yeah, the whole. And I did it like where I was not going to stop, not going to take a break. And even where Simon, I didn't take the break or whatever. But I wanted to feel it, because at the end I went to the site of the cross in the tomb, and I wanted to do the whole thing. And that's why you see me just.
Drenched.
Yeah. So the woman asked me this question, and I said to her, there was one thought, and I was disciplined. I had to make the film. I also promised myself that I wouldn't get into the debate of belief on this one, because let others take my film, and this is my job. My job's over. I presented the main arguments. I showed you that ultimately, on some level, understanding this crime scene required a moral commitment, and it wasn't just ideas or proof. And I said, so you need to confront Jesus to ultimately understand what this means. That was what I can. I was like, big surprise. That's kind of the call of Christianity's come, right? Many are chosen, few come. Like he's trying to, like, you have to go to understand what that means. But at that moment, I did have to stop, and she brought me back to a very real moment. And I went into Jesus's humanity at that point. You're in, it's basically a flea market he was on. So you think of it as like this epic tale of him going to the cross, and he's there, and it's like the big, I'm thinking of the Italian filmmaker, not Fellini. It'll come to, well, not like Fellini, but and you think of it as it was like a shaming exercise. He basically walks in these narrow flea market aisles with all these merchant guys going, like, the Romans going, see what you look like if you do anything like this. But at the time, I realized he at one point got to the point which he talked about, he prayed about, but if you believe he's fully human, he had to say, like, well, this is it. Like, now there is no going back. Like he's whatever the steps would be to where he's going to wind up. That was the feeling that was like the new moment for me. Like, wow, in his humanity, he was realizing something. But if he's human, he must have been saying, like, how much of this is, what was I now it's going to happen. He's going to find out himself also what was going to happen on those next steps. That's what came to me. And it was like, wow, there's no going back. There's no turning back.
A couple questions.
Yeah. Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, yeah, it's quite beautiful. I've often actually wondered what was the human mind of this man and his fears. I mean, he knew he was going to die. He prophesied that, like, he talked about it. But he did it. I mean, like, he still did it
at that moment. Now I'm saying what he prophesied about, and if he's human, he's still saying. That's what became real, because you realize you're not going to get away from these soldiers. You have a cross on your back. You've been beaten. You're going all the way.
You're going all the way. And I know this is so strange, but, like, I don't want this to come out the wrong way. I'm going to sound like a heretic or something. But, he was asking, Lord, let this cup pass from me in the garden. And so he did know he was going to be put to death, and he was going to be the sacrificial lamb, and he was going to rise from the dead. Like, so we knew he knew that. We know that he knew that. But he didn't necessarily know when. Or maybe that was clouded from his human mind somehow. I mean, I don't know that. How the whole Christology of what did he know, when did he know it, to what extent did he know things? It's a little vague, and I'm not sure the church is clear on that. So
I could give you some commentary, but on the idea of that if you in the pool of New Testament scholars, and I'm very close to Dale Allison and some others, like I've known them for years with my Pauline studies. They would argue, some people accept that Jesus learned in his life. I take that position, but it's argued both ways.
Right.
But I always say, going back to drama and a good tragedy or a good narrative, if you take the resurrection, and it's called, in Greek terms, it's called a reversal. I'm not going to say the Greek word right now, but in it's reversal. Like, you take the resurrection away, you take Clarence out of the end of It's a Wonderful Life, that's a tragedy. You take the ending off of that, it's a you have the drunk uncle who they're going to go poor. They're going to the wife's going to wind up like without a husband. Like, you just say it's a suicide. It's people killing themselves all over the place.
Right. The end, and it's like the saddest story ever.
Right.
If it just ended there.
Right. But you take the Gospels like that, and you say, like, you take the Gospels out of and take the resurrection off. I mean, he's born to be a king, Jesus. If you look at it again, like from human terms, like, why is he here? What in embodying the human side? He's a Messiah. He's here to be king. Even putting the narratives of the infant birth, set it up for this greatness, and who comes to notice him? Not the Jews, but the Gentiles, right? The Magi, right? They come to notice. No, this is the true one from the stars. Matthew's trying to set up that the people who will recognize this Messiah are not the Jews. Like, he sets it up early in the story. So he's born to be a king of some kind. And we don't really know how much was like expected in the earthly kingdom versus the kingdom to come. But if you allow the human part, he didn't know everything. And if you think of the garden scene alone, there's at least the tragic sense is in the Gospels. And I have something coming down the road on this, by the way, but yeah.
A couple questions about the shroud. Have you heard of the shoulder wound of Jesus? Do you know about that?
Tell me more.
So there's a couple of stories of Bernard of Clairvaux is one, and then Padre Pio is another, and they both had mystical experiences when they communicated with Christ, or Bernard communicated with Christ and asked Christ what was the most painful part of your passion, and Christ said to him, my shoulder wound, just the cross digging into my shoulder was just so painful. Which makes me wonder, was it like dislocated, or like why how could that have been more painful than nails going through your feet? I don't know. But So there is a devotional prayer written by Bernard of Clairvaux to the shoulder wound of Christ. Fast forward, from 1100 AD to Padre Pio, whenever he was. And he has the stigmata, and he's asked one day, allegedly by John Paul or Karol Wojtyła. I think Karol Wojtyła met him when he was a seminarian or a young priest. And he asked Padre Pio, I could be wrong on some of these facts, but he asked Padre Pio what was the most painful part of the stigmata, and he told him, it's my shoulder. It's the shoulder wound that no one even knows about. And then upon Padre Pio's death, people are going through his stuff, and of course he has blood on his hands and feet and on the side, but there is always blood on his shoulders in his clothes. So it's an interesting thing. It's something worth looking up, is the shoulder wound of Christ. And I've always wondered if the shroud reveals anything particular about the shoulder, but.
I've not heard that, but some of these level details to me made it clear that I think the burden is on the skeptic side, not on the faith side. For instance, like Jesus had a scrape mark in the shroud on his knee where he fell.
Pretty big one, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
deep.
And also where like the gospel narratives match, and you'd have to believe that someone would have known this and made up a fake shroud, knowing all the details to match it. And it gets kind of Monty Python-ish. You'd have to dig body, like recently buried bodies into a room and try to hit them the right way with the sheet. It was like, after a while, you're like, no, it's more about not believing this than it is finding out what's true
and
here.
Those knee wounds show that he fell 3 times,
yes,
right?
Yeah. And the blood, where the blood is, like, is because they knew he wore down. So I don't know if you know this, but they would have the cross, the consensus is that he would carry the crossbar, and then the crossbar would be hoisted up onto the pole, which could be a tree, and there's variations on all this. But the Romans, got pretty good at it, like a factory where they'd create them. So there was the idea of a clear cross was probably more likely than not, because they'd probably order like a factory. It was thousands of these up these roads and everything. But when he, the reason I brought that up is when I was arguing with the scientists. I'll give you one other data point that I thought was open and shut. The main point that scientists until today still find to be their main argument for the position of being a skeptic is the carbon dating
testing. Yeah.
So I said to these two scientists, I think it was Florida Institute, if I remember correctly, and they knew their stuff, and they read all the document. They watched my documentary. Unfortunately, I went in there, but I said to them, well, how do you know when you're doing the carbon dating, what's the carbon dating that's merely the image? What's the carbon dating that the linen itself would have absorbed over time? How much of the carbon is part of the fire it was in? Like, how do you know selectively what the carbon dating was that's only the image that was created by what's on that sheet, that linen? And they couldn't answer that question because you can't. So even the finding of the carbon dating, and we can go on for hours on this, but even going for the carbon dating at that point is selective, showing a bias the way you enter the study itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people know.
Well, this is in the book. The Shroud.
Okay. Yeah. Published by
Shroud Face to
by
Face.
Sophia, our friends at Sophia, great company. You can go get the book there. The Shroud Face to Face. Right. So you talk. Let me ask you this. I have a couple just random questions about the shroud, which I've always wondered, and your documentary talked about one of them. But nails would not have held any man on the cross, right? He must have been tied to the cross, right? I mean, his arms must have been tied and then nailed, right? His hands nailed.
It depends. It depends on, like in the Greek, the hand could be the wrist and the lower. So artistically, over the years, you have to. Here's another one of those things. Like the imagery is so embedded in us to think a certain way. Like the idea of Jesus's crown of thorns, that it would be like a crown.
But it was more like a helmet.
Like a bush.
Okay, yeah.
And you think a Roman soldier is going to stop and like weave but the idea of him being the king and the Messiah. So the artwork and the representational symbols make it more artistic to have him have a crown, but it was a bush. And the reason why it was a bush, we can keep going here, but is that they wanted to penetrate the softest entry point of the scalp, and they would go, and these stones were so strong, it would penetrate bone. It would hit the bone. So the idea of just slamming a bush on someone's head so that penetrated the scalp, just that alone Can you imagine? So yeah, so there was no crown. And then on the case of the hands, usually you think of him as open-handed, like going through the palms, but your flesh would not hold your body. So there was two things. One is the nails would go in here. They would secure your feet, either turn them to the side and have one nail go through both feet and then into the cross. But if they wanted to punish you longer, so you die from asphyxiation.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll hold that thought 1 second. But what they do is put these little blocks either under your butt and support you, so that this is the torture of it all. So you're hanging there, and then what happens is as you start to collapse and your breath collapses with your lungs are collapsing because you can't hold your weight up anymore, they give them that block because you could just go up enough to gasp enough air and you'd be on the cross longer. And actually Jesus has those scrapes in those areas where his shoulders would be scraping the cross to go up to gasp for air to keep going up. But if you didn't secure it with that block under there or other things, and sometimes they tied it, they did, but if you didn't do that, the body would just shred them. The nails would come right out of the hands. The weight of the body.
So if the nails went through the wrist,
they go in there,
then you could hang from that?
Yeah, you could, because you're catching ligament. You're catching ligament going into the wood.
Okay, yeah, and so I guess there's a bone that goes like across, and so it could go straight through, and you're hanging on the wrist.
You're hanging in that ligament because that won't break. That'll hold. But they used to go this way, or sometimes they argue it might have come this way through the hand. They caught the hand coming into the wood, so it would combination of the both, like either going that way, right, going through. But it's more likely they just went through here.
And then the feet, where they would not be flat. I mean, usually we have like this beautiful artwork where it's just two.
No, they usually go that way, go right through the ankle, like right to the side.
Okay, so but you're on the. So they would turn the feet to the side?
There's no like formula, but I'm giving you what was more likely, like what would be the case more than not.
Okay.
So I'm saying to you, they usually probably would, in the case of Jesus, I believe they twisted his feet like that. So he's like twisted, he's got he's like that, but his legs are twisted.
Right, right. And it would go through the ankle perhaps?
Because you'd get both feet into the wood, and that would hold too.
It's just,
it's brutal. And if you think about it.
It's incredible. It's hard to even talk about. I mean, it's just it's awful. It's awful.
And can I one more thing on this? And the idea to Pontius Pilate beat him the way he did to satisfy the thirst for his life, the hunger to get him killed, and he beat him in advance. He thought he was beating him so he could let him go. Mm-hmm. Like, see what I did? I almost beat him to death. Yeah. Can you please release him now? Yeah. Then he did the crucifixion. Like, people forget that, and they were excessive. They didn't honor the 39 lashes, which was the limit of Jewish punishment. They hit him 200 something times, I believe, something like that.
Is they've been able to count that from the shroud?
Well, no, it's not a perfect science, but yeah, in that estimate, yeah. Then he goes on that Via Dolorosa. So I'm saying to you, the pain level here is just off the charts of, he's probably hallucinating from the pain.
Man, I stump my toe and it ruins my day.
I know.
And you see these gashes. The shroud, it just shows hundreds of gashes out of this man's flesh. And if I had one of those, I'd like stay home from work because it would be so painful, and be like doctoring it, like, ow, and like, where's the Neosporin, and bandage it. And he had hundreds, right? It looks like hundreds. It's just
he must have been an incredible threat to power because they were making a case for him. They weren't just punishing a man; they were making the case. So going back to, I always bring up. And whenever I do like a Bible talk or whatever, I always say, he's in the garden and then the soldiers come. And what does Peter do?
Cuts the guy's
No, what's
ear
the first thing he does before he cuts him? He pulls his sword out.
A sword, yeah.
What's Peter doing with his sword?
Yeah, Christ actually told them to go get swords, right? Didn't he?
I know. What are they doing with swords?
Well, they're ready to fight if they have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're ready to fight.
Yeah, so is this lay down your sword mission only? No, it's not. So these are back to my point about when you get into the real world.
Luke's gospel, I think it's Luke. He says somewhere like, take the money and go buy swords. That's what he says.
Trade your plowshares.
Yeah. And
go get swords instead. I'm thinking, why are they with swords?
And then I think he says we have two, and then Jesus says like that's enough or something like that. I can't remember if I had the scripture in front of me.
So if you think about now, the gospels are going out into the world with the Romans watching the movement. You think they're going to characterize it as a bunch of guys running around with swords and a kingdom and a king and like? So my point to you is you have to look through these contingency lenses of what the details would have been, what's the motivation, how could they write things. So back to the narrative, I think sometimes the narrative is the universal structure by which you get the truth, because you can't get it totally from the details because the contingencies of power. And just think about like our government today, how much we don't know that's censored or filtered out that you'll never know because someone's going to lose their power by letting you know a fact or something. So you got to think that the gospel's also, and the story's all being born in these times also.
My other question about the shroud is the light, and you covered a good bit. And so there was a light, I think that was Father Spitzer, and he basically says the light burst that would have been required to produce the negative on this cloth. It was ridiculous. It was like, I don't know, 1 million light bulbs or something psycho.
Nothing they could recreate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what is your?
I'm that's what convinced me, because you remember in the chapter of my book is Seeing the Light.
Okay.
So it's a play on words. Seeing the Light was both the transition of no, I'm a film guy. Light is I'm dealing with light all day long. I know how light operates, and not only that, but Spitzer also said that physicists could write the formula of how you'd need to do this. We just can't recreate it in an experiment. So they actually have a formula how you could do this with light, but to pass through
with today's technology
and not injure the linen without burning the linen. You have to understand this is crazy. So imagine that concentrated light, but in such a fragment of a second, it doesn't burn the linen. It's impossible. So when that's another one of those points where I said that's the transition, and seeing the light was like I both saw the light technically, but now it's time to see the light, which is Jesus at the next step of this investigation.
So what do you think happened? The moment Jesus came back to life, there was a burst of light, and what was that?
There's I can get into the theories of physics, like because they go with like the black hole idea that he collapsed in, and then because the way the Greek reads, sometimes certain scholars will read the way the linen lays down in the tomb, because it'd have a slab. The tomb would have a slab where the body was kept over time. Remember when people don't know this, when Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. Mm-hmm. People think of that as like, start focusing on your mission and forget all that other. But he was basically saying, if you were paying attention to the dead, you'd have to monitor a loved one's body for probably a year or so, because it had to go to a level of decay and become bone, and you'd give it the herb and the spices, all the things that they would do to prep it. But so he was in that, but it either collapsed or the light emanated from him and then just went through the linen. But the linen, what's crazy about it is the linen was a 14-foot wraparound, like a cocoon for him, right? Mm-hmm. So it's wrapped around like this, and on the surface of it is just this thin without burning the rest of it. So there's something bizarre that had to, you can't explain it in human science what happened, and no one could, and that was another reason
So, but again, like why would there have been, other than maybe it's just showing off in a good way, but why a burst of light in order to come back to life? You know what I'm saying?
That's it. No one has asked me that, but if you ask why I didn't think of it, I kind of assumed that in some transformational, I'm going to get like esoteric here, but like just on my instincts, if you were going from the state of being to all being, light to me seems to signify the full being state. It seems like light is always a participant in, even with sainthood and miracles and visions, like even people who die and come close to death, they see the light. So
light from light, God from God.
Yeah, so light is a motif, I think, that goes with this transformation in almost every thought I've ever had about it. So I assumed that's what was happening.
I'm just thinking about this for the first time too, so I'm going to say something dumb, but it wasn't the very first day for creation, let there be light?
Yeah.
And so is this the new creation? And God said, let there be light. Kaboom. And Christ's body illuminates.
Or what about the light enters the world in Jesus? The light goes, right? When he returns, it goes out of the world. It comes back to the light. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was God, I'd be like, let's run with this. Let's run with this light theme. What do you think, Holy Spirit? Yeah, we got it. Let's go.
That's good. That's good.
God
of the author of light. I don't like that third act. Right. Oh, that'll work. Let's do that resurrection.
I like that. It's really quite beautiful. Do you know if in the linen, like, did the image come through the linen, or is it like just underneath?
It's a thin layer
on the linen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So someone described it as if you took a hair out of your head and you split it, like I forgot how many times. That's the layer level. So just think about that alone. How do you manage a source of light, but it doesn't wind up? The linen couldn't have been that thick or that powerful, like that to endure something like that. So there's something going on. Maybe it was the speed of it. Like if you want to get a little scientific here, I mean, a science fiction, was it like the speed of it? So it came like a snapshot, like the snapping of a photo. So it was so fast that it didn't burn because of time. You know.
Have you heard the theory that that at the resurrection, Christ actually like elevated up and was standing up, and the way that his hair and things are displayed on the shroud indicate that he was like upright when the flash of light happened, as opposed to laying flat on his back.
I did not hear that.
Yeah,
although I was always thinking in my mind, if the metaphor was I was the investigator who ultimately wanted to go in the tomb, and I did go to his tomb, but if I was to go in the tomb at that moment and find the linen, and I picked it up, it would be like the portrait of Christ, like in there. So I imagined it as like almost like a vertical, but no, I think no. And there's also the way he laid, and also through rigor mortis.
Yes.
His body started to, that's why his legs are bent and why his body started to rise up. Yeah. And what's crazy about this is
interesting.
The reason why they know that is because eventually when they got the science to study the linen, they realized that the image that's now imprinted in the lineage, the details are 3D, meaning where the body is closer, the density or the resolution of the image is more defined. So it means like you could show distance back to the slab. So if his knees are up like this, the knees and where his head is going to be a certain level of density, and then further away would be a lower density because it's further away from the cloth. So even there, it's proving a 3D image is imprinted on that. They didn't even know that when they first discovered the shroud.
That's amazing. This is strange, but what do you? Okay, so he resurrects. He's in the tomb. It's dark except for the flash of light. He wakes up. He takes off the linen. He leaves it there, which we know he leaves it there. And then do you think he just like snaps his fingers and makes the tomb roll away, or the stone roll away?
There's no way to. There's no.
And then he walks out and it's just in the dark, and he's walking around. I mean, what's he doing? Is he like, let's go get some coffee? I mean, I don't know what's he do then. I mean, he appears.
We're totally speculating.
He appears as the gardener later on. I wonder if Mel Gibson's movie The Resurrection is going to deal with like what he did when he came out of the tomb.
No comment. No comment.
Do you know anything about The Resurrection?
No comment.
Okay.
No. Anyway, no. Let's go back to that because I think I've always imagined that was his dematerializing, if you will. Like I didn't think of him as getting up and at that moment walking out of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess he appears and disappears, so I don't know what he's doing. You know.
There's also like. I mean, this is again like this is a series.
Well, the tomb was rolled away.
Yeah.
So somebody did it. I mean, Jesus must have done it.
And it gets like my forensic studies gets to a point of limited. It's limited because the perspectives in the Gospels are not all telling exactly the same details. For instance, like some have soldiers. I always said, knowing the Roman army, so if you fell asleep on your job, you were killed. Like you were murdered for doing that. Like murdered, you were that was the punishment for falling asleep as a guard. So if there were two guards there, nothing unless an angel did something. So that you get into all these theories like that some of the Jews paid off the Roman soldiers to walk away and not do their job, and this, or was it Sanhedrin guards?
It wasn't worth it to them. They were going to be killed. Yeah.
No, I think the one thing they had to do was find that body. Like if you're thinking from the powers, again, the powers that be, you find that body, conversation's over, movement's done, right? Yeah. But the one thing is curious, you remember like even in John, he goes to see them, and I think in Matthew, but they don't recognize him.
Yes, that's right.
So that to me is a deep mystery, because why he's been resurrected, other than when you get to, and again, I'll
tell you why I think he was,
yeah.
I mean, I think he appeared much younger. I think in the resurrected body, we will be in our prime, our physical prime, much younger. And this man had an exhausting 3 years. He had been beat to hell, of course, at the end, but his resurrected body was perfect. And so it didn't have the wear and tear of age and a 3-year, very, very difficult ministry. So he looked a lot younger, and that alone could have been, and you must be like these little ones that enter the kingdom of heaven. I mean, I think there is a youthfulness to the glorified body that we might not appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, that comes out when is the woman who has multiple husbands, and like which one is her husband? Like what period in her life do you bring that husband back?
Yeah.
So there is that. There's no answer to that, but I would say there's also the way Paul talks about the transformation doesn't quite. I don't think they're describing it slightly different than the way John describes, like, touch me, put it in my wound. Like his argument in 1 Corinthians 15 is the transformation of the body. So is he a body of flesh? Of course he is. He has fish. He has for fish. Yeah. So does he still has his digestive organs if he's having fish. And I don't know why you want to keep going this. I don't mind speculating. I'm just saying.
Well, the Shroud raises these questions. I mean, I think it does. I mean, he resurrects. I mean, I think that's what this Shroud shows. I mean, it had to have been some kind of resurrection.
The light, you cannot.
The light happened. It's not bloodstains.
It's unexplained.
It's not bloodstains, right?
No, the light happened. There's no doubt of that. Yeah. Unexplained.
So what? How did this affect your spiritual life after studying this passion? I mean, this brutal torture, savage torture of this man who, by the way, happens to be your God. What did it do to you?
Well, let me do the practical part. The first practical part was like, no, this is plausible, and the burden's now on them. And with my book, I went around basically saying, tell me why the arguments are out, and I debated. So from a practical level, I felt like I had done enough homework, and I wasn't going to spend my life being an expert. So I basically said, here's an intro book, and here's a film about my experiences to write this and do this. So it gave me a tool to put it back on in the scientific world, that it's your burden, not ours. So forget all you're a superior and you're enlightened. We're all superstitious. We don't look at evidence, and that's crazy. So it was almost a tool to advocate again. No, you're in the same water we are. You're doing faith just like we are. And the proof's on our side when it comes to the Gospels in the case of the Shroud. And now we have this forensic evidence proving it. And I always thought people would say, what do you think God did this for? Like, or Jesus, why did they bring the Shroud out at this point? It tracks back. It's kind of a checkered history, but it tracks back. And I always thought, like, if God deals with us in the real world, and he knows the scientific world is dominating our thoughts, like post-enlightenment, and like, deal with this, like throw a symbol in, and go like, well, I got that too, if you want that. Now do your debating and find out that's not really why you don't come to me. That's not why you don't take your faith serious. It's you're avoiding something, not because of the science. So that was it. But to be honest with you, I didn't need the Shroud. I don't know if this makes sense to you. I didn't need the Shroud to alter my faith, or I don't know. It was almost like an added bonus, but not. It didn't add. It just made me say, you now on top of the Gospels, the journey, the impact on history, the man, the drama. It just added, like, now you have a forensic tool to further point to this phenomena.
Yeah. Have you heard that Mary, the Mother of God, tradition holds that she would walk the journey that he did, the same that you did. You carried the cross, but she would go and walk that way of the cross all the time. And that was how the Stations of the Cross devotion began. It's the devotion that the Blessed Mother gave us. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, I've been working on a book on Mary for a while, and I want to just handle her proximity as a mom to Jesus. Just her proximity. You have to understand, we're seeing sketches and pieces in the gospel. Someone is watching every time he fell down, every time he was hungry, every time he got sick. Can you imagine that, watching that from that perspective?
Yeah.
Just take a moment and just think about, that's mom looking at that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's remarkable. It's remarkable. Well, you want to go from the Shroud to Karl Marx? I mean, that's a big shift.
Wow.
But I mean, is there a big gap in between?
Paul's in between.
Paul's in between. And I didn't get to see that. But yeah.
No, Paul, no. There's original Paul in 2013, as a book, and then a film that came out after it that's now being turned into a 2-volume series, both book and film.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get out. But in between there, I went back to Princeton's theological, and I also continued writing articles, independent studies, and advanced what I had originally gone for with Paul in like a modern setting, and brought all the arguments up to date of where I had started, and 10 years later revisited this whole journey. So that's to come out, but it wasn't like I was not developing other things. I also did a study on Alistair McIntyre, who just died.
Yeah.
If you want to get into it, because I think he's on to, I think he, to me, is, if you're creating a lineage of the best of Catholic thought, taking it into the culture. He was a Stalinist and a Marxist, and then
is that where your Aristotle concepts come from? I mean, did he teach Aristotle? Because wasn't he a great?
I've read Aristotle from way back.
Wasn't he a great Aristotelian philosopher?
Yeah. He understood. This is good. I think if you want to, do you want to take a break on McIntyre, because he might get us to.
No, I love McIntyre.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So he's one of the reasons where he wrote Marxism and Christianity, and it's a well-known book, and like with him treating it, having been a Marxist, so he's going to take it serious, and he became a Catholic convert later. So he allowed, and he still believes, along with a lot of Catholic believers, that you have to take Marx serious enough.
Wait a minute. Was he an Aristotelian philosopher? Am I thinking of Mortimer Adler?
Yeah. No, he's not strictly, but I could tell you his use of Aristotle's ethics.
Okay.
And his return to the idea of virtue and ethics is all born of the Aristotelian.
That's it. I've been meaning to go back and look up his work, so I know I've read him, but I can't remember. Yeah.
I got a book, a proposal on him, because I've always been tracking him, and I did independent studies with some experts, but what he did, I don't know if you know this ultimately, but he came to terms, and I think taking a moment to understand this, we'll go back into Marx, but also show, I think, a summary how important stories are. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he basically said that he didn't believe in the modern liberalism project. And I don't mean liberal, politically liberal. I mean classical liberalism, like the way our Lockean thinking, which is empiricism, which comes to some degree from Thomas, by the way. Mm. So Locke is, okay. So, and then Thomas brings Aristotle. So there's a link between naturalist thinking all the way through to modern empiricism. But the reason why, I'm being really shortcut here, but it gets the point. He didn't believe in the Kantian idea of the categorical imperative. So the idea that you could have neutral, unifying, universal principles that are not rooted in cultural limitations, like the real ethics of, like Aristotle saying, you learn in a community, it has to be a certain language, and virtue is learned from childhood through to an older age. You can't teach it, because the problem with intellectual ideas as being the moral core of a society is it can be manipulated by power. In the same way Marx accuses religion of being the opium of the people, he was saying, in a way, liberalism could become like global interest. We're going to the other country because for the good of the people. We're going to feed the poor, dig for oil, start a war. Like, he was trying to say that it covers, and I buy this, by the way, it covers for so many other self-interests that it's not enough of a holding tool, because they believe that's the Enlightenment dream, that as long as you could think it and feel it, it's like the ideal again controls the universe. But he was saying people are much more limited than that. It has to be brought back to the real world, where you grow up, the people you knew, and he uses the metaphor of the crew of fishermen to go out to fish. Like you don't see your captain as an authority figure to revolt against, because you see he plays a role or she plays a role that you don't play, and you fit in because you see the mission and you assume. So virtue comes almost like through your pores. Mm. And he also uses farming, the metaphor of farming, as an analogy for this. But why it's important is he believed we need to completely return back to our original stories and tell our new story. I always think of it as, in the end, the hobbits go home. If you know Lord of the Rings. Yes. The hobbits go home. They don't stay out in Mordor, right? They don't go global. They fight the war globally.
The hobbits weren't globalists.
No, they weren't.
That's a great headline.
They weren't. Yeah. I think that's the theme of our show. No, but it's true. The hobbits weren't globalists.
That's good.
But they fought on global grounds. They did business on global grounds. But you're not a global. You don't live your virtue in global thinking. Yeah. Because that has people could use that for you and manipulate you. So he was all about like the return. I called it the eternal return but it's always you have to go back. And he was like, we need to develop how we use narratives, tell the right stories, whatever. So he wasn't the reason I did Marx. There's a series of reasons, but I'll tell you where it began was in 2020. Unless you had a question.
No, man.
Okay.
No.
In 2020, when I was COVID, I had a studio in downtown Princeton, a green screen studio. And in one night or within a week's time, I'm probably condensing things here, but let's say one night was the main snapshot, but it could have been a week of events that I'm tying some of them together. It was the riots were going on all over the country. I was listening to Divine Comedy on audiobook at the time.
Yes.
Paul Kenger sent me his book on Marx, The Devil and Karl Marx,
yeah.
which, if nothing else, I've read him. I read him in the 20s and 30s, but I kind of knew a surface level of Marx, and I understood his suspicions. But I never heard about the Satanism and the whole idea of his Luciferian streak. So it was fascinating that someone gathered all this information into a book. And it's like I see myself as like building on where Paul was going with my book. But anyway, or at least showing the architecture of what he was pointing out, the larger architecture of it. But when I saw it, and I'm sitting in my studio and COVID's on and the news and the usual business, and I think either recently or that day in Princeton, there was the protesting going on. And then I'm watching them burning down a 5-year anniversary from last night and that's why I also wanted to do this, but they were burning down, and ultimately they burned down the police station. And I said, there's no way the governor's going to let that. I mean, let's just stop a second.
Yeah.
You could do many things in the leniency of a violent moment. You do not. I repeat for everyone listening, you do not burn a police station down. Yeah. You never give over to chaos like that. I don't care. And I remember the police leaving that building.
I remember the videos. You could see all the cars just driving away.
The police are leaving that building?
I know.
I was worried. That's America right there. You cannot. You could agree on levels of injustice. You could fight all those other battles. You cannot burn a police station down and let it burn. And I don't know if you remember Governor Walsh's famous comment.
Yes.
The smell of rubber. She opened the windows.
His wife.
His wife, yeah. She opened the windows and said she loved the smell of burning rubber because she saw it. Like, just think of this. Just think of this where we're at.
It's an animalistic kind of response and this is Governor
Walsh, who ran as vice
VP,
president.
Yeah.
So all of that in a snapshot. So I went to sleep.
And he decided to do what? Like the next day, he decided to just not prosecute anyone.
No, and remember Kamala Harris bailed out with George Soros's money, but bailed out some of the people who got the money to. So my point was, beyond I don't want to go into the subject because I think race will divert all these other subjects, and I'm not saying there's not a place for it, but I think it robs so many other layers of conversation if it's only about the racial piece of it. Although it's there's no doubt. I'm not denying, but I said this is the converging of so many different powers here. This is not an art like a governor letting the police station burn down. This moment has been prepared. If you know what I mean. It's been seeded years ago and decades ago. And I said, man, that damn Karl Marx, because the way Marx, the details are different. The modern details are different. But the way Marx positioned things was he organized the world around the victims, the proletariat, and the bourgeois. So you have
class
to
warfare.
You have to organize the world in terms of this bipolar way of thinking, where you always see the enemy. Whenever someone has got an upper hand or an advantage, it's because they did something to manipulate you and oppress you. So you're like the victimization thing. And I said, and then you see the generation of kids. They have no jobs. They can't buy homes, right? Because the real estate was too high. Because the global interest, the wars, the Wall Street March, and I'm thinking they've lived in a vacuum. Now, you just need to grow up in any generation, but I'm of an older generation. But you grow up and you have no responsibilities. You're not married. You don't own a home. And you're hearing in school pumped into you all day long how you need to find victims, virtual signal to belong socially, and go on and on and on. And I was like, no one's getting at the real. This is not like a left-right argument.
Well, I think when we looked at those chaotic moments, we could look at it and say, yeah, these kids out there, these rioters, are Marxists, and they don't know it. And I think when most people hear someone's a Marxist, they're thinking of economics.
Yes, or philosophy.
But it's not about their wanting communism. It's not that. It's this notion of the oppressed underclass that has to revolt and rise up, as he says in the last sentence of the
Communist Manifesto.
Rise up. And that ethos has worked its way from the academia into the everyday guy on the street. And that's what we saw when that police station was burned down. Fair enough? Make sure to follow at Conor Gallagher Show on Instagram and Facebook. It's there where you can engage with the content much deeper, behind the scenes footage, behind the scenes content. It's going to be fascinating. Now back to the episode.
Yes. But let me go back. So what we're saying in my language, and tell me if this registers with you, is to teach people how to assume the reality of the world is the most powerful moment. That's why Gramsci knew you got to get him in school. When he knew, like he said, the majority of like bourgeoisie would never vote in radical Marxist thinking, because he knew most people are going to see it as impractical. Most people do get to a middle class level, do succeed enough where they're generally content, although I'm sure not for everyone and always needs a balance or a reinvestigation. But he knew if you get them young where their assumptions are, you need to think this way. You need to feel, are you not avert? Don't you care? Race? You're getting them, you're blunting their instincts toward maybe a view of virtue. Like what about that we're fragile? What about spiritual warfare, not material warfare? Like you lose all the abilities to explore, I think, a more fully developed worldview, and you start positioning like this bipolar way. Class struggle. Who is the upper class? Who's the lower class? Who's the racist? Who's not the racist? Who's the anti-gender people? Who's the pro-gender? And you organize people around power. And this is what's so evident in that moment, because people are using, I think, that moment and reading into it and projecting a whole other level of thought and a worldview.
All right, let me get your thought on this. I've thought a lot in the past that if you're a student of history, you see that class warfare has always been with us. I mean, go back to Spartacus and the slaves revolting against the Romans, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's always been present. But there's only really a handful of times. I mean, slavery usually was not a result of race. It was usually just which nation conquered another nation.
Period.
They could have been just the same color, and they just, North Carolina lost against South Carolinians, and so
that was the rules of the game.
That was rules of the game. But you come to our nation, and you have...
I would qualify using what that slave meant to a modern slave. That's the only qualifier I would use.
Correct. You're right.
But you're right. You won because it was the spoils of war, and usually killed the men, took the women and children.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but class warfare usually wasn't, throughout the history of the world, race-based. And now, in our country, because of our history of slavery, class warfare has been largely race-based. Doesn't that make it even worse than what Karl Marx was talking about in his day and time, calling the proletariat to rise up? This is why it's so difficult in our nation to handle this, because the class warfare has an added level of difficulty. It's not just economics. There is a race component to it with our horrific history of slavery. So I've looked at that, and I've said to myself, and this is just my own thought, but how do we get past this? Okay, I mean, how do you get past it if the class warfare is also race warfare? Okay, I hate the fact that it is.
Well, how about it's just you could retrofit anything in there. So you put anything in it because it's not the argument, it's the framework. It's the orientation toward the world.
Okay, but here's my issue. If it's class warfare and it's not race-based, okay, then somebody can kind of just like work their way out of it, and they're no longer the underclass. It's just done. But if the class warfare is largely based on race, and you're still a different color, you still have that built-in problem. You haven't, even if you become rich.
Oh, I see.
So
they should remain distinctive.
You
anyway.
have a black guy who gets out of that lower class. He works hard. He succeeds. He gets out of it. But he hasn't gotten out of the underclass yet because it's also based on race in his perspective. That's what I'm saying. So my point is like we have an extra problem in this country because we have the same thing that everyone's had throughout the history of the world, which is class warfare. But we have race warfare. No matter what your economic, class is, you still have color. So my point is this: are we gonna not solve this in America until interracial marriages happen and everyone is 100 years from now is everyone's just a little browner, and a little lighter and a little darker, and so we don't have these two stark classes of race? Do you think that's what it's going to take to solve this deep problem in our country?
We're gonna have to go slow here because that was a lot of territory to cover. Go back to what you just said about how originally the idea of slavery, and by the way, I do give Marx credit on his model of master slave, lord and serf, then becoming capitalism. The factory redesigns the relationship of class, right? And I think, just as a side note, we can come back to it, I think he is making a good observation that for the people who mythologize capitalism, and when they read my book, and this is the conversation I want to get into, mythologize capitalism. And that's not a Catholic position, by the way.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
Are you talking about Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, 1891?
John Paul II.
John Paul II. They have problems with unbridled capitalism. They just said capitalism, but what they really mean in today's world is like libertarianism.
When I thought of this, and I even discussed it a little bit with Paul, I always said if you took John Paul II up to where we ended his life with the communism, defeat of communism, and then you did the second volume, the sequel would be against consumerism and capitalism.
Yes, I know.
People are forgetting this.
They do forget it.
The Catholic position does not see capitalism over communism. They don't see state over free market. They see them both as potentially corruptible, and they need to be monitored by a moral ethic of Christianity. That's a different position than a mythical capitalism. Like capitalism, it's a this is not, I read the compendium for my book. This is not a Catholic position. Like the market will self-correct itself. No, that's not
that is
Catholic
not the
teaching.
Catholic teaching. No, dude, I'm with you. I used to teach Catholic social doctrine at Belmont Abbey. I mean, I've studied. By the way, if I was ever elected Pope, which I would not be, I'd be the first Pope with 16 children. I would be,
Well,
so.
I have a little bit of a sense of humor. So the 16 kids are too many punchlines, but
right.
At the right time.
The point is, I would choose Leo XIV as my name too. And now we have Leo. I really would have because of my love for the man who wrote Rerum Novarum. And so to this day, if you ask me, are you a capitalist? I'm sorry, I've read Hilaire Belloc, G.K. Chesterton, Leo XIII, Fulton Sheen, Frank Sheed, Christopher Dawson. I've read the tradition. I cannot go around saying I'm a capitalist because the traditional definition of that is very different than the way we use the word today. So today I'll say I'm not a libertarian. The church has always condemned unbridled capitalism, unbridled free market. So the Servile State by Hilaire Belloc is one of the best articulations of this. There's these two nasty monsters that can eat us up, big government or big business.
And Marx, by the way, saw, just for the record, these are the building blocks I want to get across and go slow if we have time.
Yeah.
But Marx didn't see the default to the state as an answer. He actually wanted communism. So it was the dream. Think of it, the way to think about communism is like the kingdom of God. It's a revolutionary, eschatological new category of the world. You have to get there, but he thought you get there through material movements, like by breaking the power of the material world, not a spiritual battle or an individual's quest to find God or the beatific vision. But in the end, like he didn't believe the state replaces free markets. He thought the state is equally as evil because they become the puppets of the money.
Right.
The state is just the money buying it through another means. He also predicted, now I am going to give him credit, but he predicted once the problem with capitalism is that it concentrates power and it wipes out the competition. And like when it's in slower times.
Well, that's true.
It goes beyond the borders to find cheap labor, and it does.
It does.
And then what it does is it buys the media to control the narrative, and it controls the technology for the means of production.
Yeah, I know. I read
that is the modern world.
It is. And I read the Communist Manifesto about a year ago. I was teaching it to some high school kids recently around here. We have homeschool co-ops here.
Are we two Catholics talking about the Communist Manifesto?
Yeah, we are.
Seriously?
But I read it, and I had read it before. But you read it, and you're like, okay, there's a lot of prophetic things in here. I mean, he didn't get everything wrong. The problem is
2/3 of it has been enacted.
Yes, but the problem is he lists some things that this is what every heresy does, though. It gives you some truth, and then it takes a left turn that takes you somewhere you have no idea why you ended up there. And that's what he does in the Communist Manifesto, in my reading of it, my simple reading of it. There's a lot that's right, and then he goes nuts with the solution.
But between that parentheses, between going nuts and I don't want to sit here like arguing pro Marx. Like
no, not at all. It's just,
but I want to take.
He didn't get everything wrong. He got something right.
So I wanted to back into this, like when you're saying, I think in the case of Catholicism, this is my take. I'm not a theologian, but I'm pretty well versed in. I try and do my homework a lot, but I think that's not the Catholic position. They would treat capitalism and communism equally suspicious, or state. Let's say the state, because I think communism is more the dream of a evolved human being or whatever. That's not real. It's a fantasy, I think, but like the kingdom of God, but in a material way. But I think even if you look at like the state being in control, that these enlightened, it's Platonic. He's a Platonist, by the way. This is why I'm saying to you back to Augustine and what the corrective is, because I think we need this corrective now. Because the corrective of why Aristotle, let me say this correctly. In the reasons why Thomas was accused of being a heretic in the dynamics of his time could be on certain levels, and I have to flush this out to get really into the details. You could argue it would be someone saying that Marx's criticism of modern capitalism has to be integrated into the system. The criticism of it, not the solution, not the promotion of what he did and where it led or what others did with his teachings, but in the criticism, it have to integrate it, because that's where I meant it's the corrective, because what it does is it takes the top-down thinking of everyone. We're going to heaven. Who cares if you have any food? We'll be in a different place. Who cares if you're starving or what your family needs or the inner city is falling apart? Heaven's more important than your need. So it's like not Catholic social teaching to think this way.
No.
You meet people now. You give them, you came to me and you were poor and I gave you bread. Where were you when it's all about meeting people's needs immediately, not keep transferring it? This is Marx's critique. You keep putting it in another world where you don't have to address the evils of now. So when you just keep thinking, I wanted to get there because I wanted to say, when we get into this idea, I don't want to do the default conversation where Marx wanted the capitalism and the government to run everything. He thought it was as foolish, like as poorly a step. And he even thought the dictator of the proletariat was temporary.
Yeah.
That's where his mistake was.
Yeah.
He thought, they'll take power for the good people and then they'll step off. He was like, no, they don't give it up once they have it.
Hey, Mr. Producer, are you able to pull up something on the screen? Look, while we continue to talk, look up Centesimus Annus, which is John Paul II's encyclical. Centesimus Annus, and then find me like paragraph 41, if my memory's right. And let me know when you have that up.
Heavy critiques of, and he also, I don't know if you noticed, John Paul II carried around a Marxist tract. And someone said to him, don't you want to carry the Bible or a prayer book around? And he said, I want to know what the enemy's thinking. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So take us back to while they're looking it up.
Yeah.
When they do, we're just going to interrupt, and because I want to show you, because you brought up John Paul II, and we all forget that John Paul II, like as you were saying, he critiqued both sides of this extreme, and that's why I want paragraph 41 or 42. I think it's 41. Is the silver bullet where people say, was John Paul II a capitalist? This paragraph answers that question. We'll see. Mm-hmm. All right. So take us back to you're in your studio, you're watching the riots. Yes. How did this lead to you writing another book?
So I went to sleep and I had a dream. And in the dream, and it's like a dream, it doesn't make logical sense. It's almost like a phantasmagoria, like of mixed fragmented images. But on some level, I felt concerned. Like, I've just never imagined the world to be like this. I never thought a new form of neo-Marxism or Marxism would be witnessed in my life. I just thought it was like an old conversation after 91. Like, this is old hat, like time to move on to new models. And I'm not saying also those people on the street are all doing it for Marxist reasons. I want to be clear. Like, I knew people who were involved in those marches, but they were not Marxists. They were just thinking they wanted justice. They understood the capitalists. So it is, you have to understand, I don't read this as left-right. All the forces I put there, I put capitalism in that category too. the COVID, the capitalist forces, the real estate market, these
pharmaceuticals
kids, being crushed, crushed by the forces that are beyond those kids. So I don't completely put it on them like they're a bunch of radicals.
Of course not. No.
That's what Marx
they're
taps
frogs
into.
in a boiling water, you know.
That's what Marx is tapping into, because he's saying to them
All right, so we pulled this. Sorry, we're interrupting here. Is that okay?
Yeah.
We're gonna look. So maybe it's.
I think I was about to say something profound there, but we'll get back to it.
Go up to 40. It doesn't look like it's the question. Maybe 42. Go down to 42.
If you're going to interrupt me, you have to know exactly the verse.
Here it is, 42.
Okay, good.
So let me just read this.
I'll let it slide.
I found it.
Yep.
Returning now. I said 41 or 42. Pretty close. So.
I'll let you slide on that. Yeah.
Returning now to the initial question. Okay, so Centesimus Annus, for the people who don't know, this was a 100th anniversary of what? Leo the 13th's Rerum Novarum. And this is significant for everybody because we got a brand new Pope, Leo the 14th.
Yeah.
Returning now to the initial question, and he wrote this right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So that's the significance of this. Can it perhaps be said that after the failure of communism, which just happened, capitalism is the victorious social system, and that capitalism should be the goal of the countries now making effort to rebuild their economy and society? He's saying that's the question. So communism fails, Berlin Wall, Soviet Union's falling apart, led by the Solidarity movement in Poland that he was helping fund, as you talked about in your documentary. Should it be replaced with capitalism? That's what he's asking. Quote, is this the model which ought to be proposed to the countries of the third world which are searching for the path to true economic and civil progress? The answer is obviously complex. If by, he puts in quotes, capitalism is meant an economic system which recognizes the fundamental and positive role of business, the market, private property, and the resulting responsibilities for the means of production, as well as free human creativity in the economic sector, then the answer is certainly in the affirmative, even though it would perhaps be more appropriate to speak of, quote, business economy, market economy, or simply free economy. This is because John Paul II doesn't want to use the word capitalism because it means something in the tradition.
Yes.
So he says, if it's that, what he just said, free human creativity, et cetera, private property, positive role of business, then yes. And then he continues, but if by capitalism, in quote unquote, is meant a system in which freedom in the economic sector is not circumscribed.
Let's put a footnote on that and we'll talk about it. Circumscribed. Yep.
Not circumscribed within a strong juridical framework which places it at the service of human freedom in its totality and which sees it as a particular aspect of that freedom, the core of which is ethical and religious, then the reply is certainly negative. So he's saying unbridled capitalism, or what we might call today libertarianism, is inconsistent.
Libertarianism is better for me for that. Yeah.
Yep. It is inconsistent with the Catholic teaching on economics and politics and human dignity throughout the whole tradition.
Yes.
And this is why I don't like to say I'm a capitalist, because John Paul II didn't want to say. I think John Paul II was hijacked by a number of neocon libertarians.
Totally.
That this document came out in 1991, and they said, "Oh, look, he's a capitalist," and I don't think he was at all. I think this right there, that paragraph right. That's why I had it. The number memorized. I have a terrible memory, but I remember important things, and that's important.
No, that's great.
That's very important for our people to understand in light of, thanks, you can take it down now. Leo the 14th chose this. His name is Leo the 14th. And this is all in that tradition, and he knows this tradition. So whatever he's going to come out with in regards to freedom of the economy, freedom of human dignity, the role of AI in the economy. It's going to be very interesting. But this does relate all back to Karl Marx. This is in the response. Yes. This is John Paul II responding to Marxism failing miserably and communism failing miserably. But you don't replace it with capitalism.
No. I mean, that if I accomplish nothing else from this interview and every other word that comes out of my mouth, and I want to tie it back. You asked me before a good question that lingered in my mind about why the shroud in that, my development of films, because I think you just gave me the answer. So when I'm thinking about that, I'm trying to say we have never addressed the elephant in the room. So as a Catholic, and by the way, if there's any hope for the Catholic Church to not be bipolar anymore, which I think it's not a bipolar church.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Catholic church.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bipolar. So being co-opted either from the left, which is say liberation theology and whatever, but on the right saying there's a distinction between being a Catholic and a right wing or a political right person. Those are two different distinctions. If one's based on the free market alone and no ethic, no social ethic, but Catholicism is based on an ethic. So you'd read in the compendium, I don't remember the exact words. I don't know if they can.
You're talking about the compendium of social doctrine.
Yeah,
in the Catholic
social
Church,
doctrine. But it actually said that unless this is leading, and I think the word was ethical conditions, or like it was modified by the result of it. It wasn't left, and it says clearly it's not a self-correcting system on its own. Yeah. So all I'm saying to you is this goes back to this. It goes back to, I think, where we are. I think it's the debate that keeps happening and why the globalists keep winning. It's because as long as we see this as like a reduced cultural war about like only cultural ideas, not seeing the forces, I think this is why Marx's critique has to wake us up. Because he's saying sometimes the forces get so big that the very assumptions and how you think become clouds. You can't think clearly anymore about the way you're thinking about it because it would have such an impact on you. You start burying it and make it secondary to your life. And then you lose your ethic. You lose your ability to be moral because you have to feed your kids.
Yeah.
You know, if someone comes in your house or you can't feed your kids, you might start robbing things, right? At some point, at some level of ethics are related to real resources. So until that is engaged, and this left-right thing, we're stuck forever. And I think it's a continued decay. But I just think that's the kind of critique that McIntyre was looking for. I don't think he was looking for it. I think I know another classicist, Dennis Turner also wrote a book, Marxism and Christianity. He was a classicist out of Yale Divinity, and I'm reading it now. But I think trying to address it, so tying it back into the Shroud and everything else, I think all of these things are me challenging where we source our information. This is what just came to me when you were saying that. So for instance, Patton says, if you don't fight the Russians now, you're going to have a whole Cold War 40 years. He's ignored the bureaucrats make the decision. Kind of like a Marxist thing in a way. Right? Like the military man can't supply the wisdom because bureaucracies in power are thinking of their own interest and they can't take this profit, like for warning us. Then I'm thinking the divine plan, people are all arguing that the divine plan was corrected by free markets on their own, and dig a little deeper, you have two men of faith that almost got killed.
Reagan and John
both born in the face of communism. Like the source we get this from, who Reagan is seen as a oppressor of the inner city and a racist. Things so far from your mind when you know his life, it's just off the charts. Yeah. And then John Paul II lives on the communism, and he's a big critic of capitalism. And all the Catholic thinkers are. Ratzinger will give you the critique, and they're all in the compendium of social doctrine. So I think sometimes what I'm looking for is the blind spots and the assumptions of the culture, like a cultural theorist would think about it. Like, why did we assume that? Like, where's this mythology of capitalism coming from? Who benefits? So who benefits from the Rust Belt, gouging the Rust Belt and sending all the workers and destroying generations that are all drug addicted now? Who benefits from that to go to China for cheap labor? Yeah. What about the Middle Eastern wars? Like, who benefits from all this? Why are we in perpetual war? Like, I'm not saying there's no fights, there's just fights. I'm not a pacifist at all.
But you're saying who benefits. You know what it is? You just follow the money. It's like the old saying, follow the money.
That's kind of a Marxist thing, right? Follow the money?
Yeah, but it shows you who's pulling some strings.
So the critique is a tool that's a wise tool, has to be put back in play. My biography goes beyond that, but I think so in the case of the Shroud, I was trying to say, no, it's not science against faith. It's selective ideology. I'm trying to show again, like, science does not have an upper hand. The Enlightenment is largely a failure. But in most of the culture we've grown up in, it seems like it's distanced itself from like the concept of sin and imperfect thinking, imperfect mankind. It's because we've been above it. We're like enlightened. Once we do science, we're like completely objective, which that's been.
Oh my gosh.
So I was going after that science assumption, probably like, you're not any more objective than a person of faith. I would say a person of faith is just being more realistic about it. Like, I'm going to believe in something. I believe this. You know?
Well, when your parents were in high school, the universe was 8 billion years old, and now it's 13.8 billion years old. So it's aged a lot, really fast. But they were certain then, and they're certain now. And that's, I think COVID more than anything showed everybody to be suspicious about the facts of science. We're just suspicious now. They overplayed their hand, and now people are suspicious about a lot of things. When the government lies, the government cheats, and big pharma lies, and insurance companies lie and cheat, and World Health Organization spouts off all kinds of things. It just makes the populace very, very suspicious, and that's reasonable.
And they're all going underground or go, and God bless here, but I'm hoping your podcast is doing well. But I think the podcast world surged because the real opinion, I think people on a day-to-day speaking to each other all know this is going on, but they have no voice because the powers control that upper tier of media, language. So we all know this, but it goes underground. And when it goes underground, that's really bad because that's where revolutions start. And so I think like getting into these topics through these different ways, maybe I'll get censored, maybe I'll get shut down, but I think I'm pulling that, I'm stepping on that third rail or that thread again, saying until you take what Marx's critique was seriously, like the Catholic Church does. I'm in the zone of the Catholic Church. G.K. Chesterton, McIntyre, Ratzinger, John Paul II. I think there was another one where I actually wrote an article I'm publishing on this, on like the Catholic position on Marx.
Yeah.
But until you take it serious, you have half a critique. You've got communism down, you keep bashing it, making a lot of money on the Cold War, but now that's run out. Like you're not looking the elephant in the face. Second half of that conversation is, well, once the state crumbled, even though it was making a comeback recently, then you go to what? Personality cults? Like, what's the term? Where'd we go with this? We were trying to go back to an ethic, which was the constitutional idea. There are principled ways to living. They go back to the parochial, like McIntyre was saying. It's the parochial, not the hobbits don't rule from, they go to Hobbitville. What's it called? What's the...
Shire?
Yeah, the Shire.
Yeah.
You go back to the Shire. That's
Shire.
where you get your ethics from. You don't keep doing it because the politician told you, like, we got to go, like, save people over here. Like, we can't even save ourselves. So, like, we're out of money. So, in a way, it's like writing this was like a no-brainer for me because I think it's the elephant in the room. I hope I'm clear. We're saying a lot here, but...
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So it's called, the book title is Karl Marx, The Divine Tragedy. As opposed to the Divine Comedy for people who don't catch that. And the Divine Comedy is structured as Inferno, Paradiso, or Purgatorio, and then Paradiso. So you work from the bottom up. And what you've done is you've reversed it. It's not a comedy, but a tragedy. And you start with this biography of Karl Marx. You start at Paradise. So let's go through it. Book 1, Academic and Paradise. What do you mean?
If you told me I could get a time machine and go back in time, he's born 1813 in Prussia, and like the height of French Enlightenment is coming over, Voltaire, the sweeping changes of the world at the time, and then you study it, all those Berlin, you're under Hegel.
He's German. Let's just make that point. Everybody thinks he's Russian. Which is dumb.
No.
I mean, it's just because they think of the Soviet Union.
He didn't even speak Russian.
No, he's German. He's German. Just to make clear,
very German.
Germans always get us in trouble.
Very German. But yeah, so he's born at a time of like revolutionary change, and without getting into the artist of the time. And I'm thinking of 19th century Chopin and Beethoven. Like you're thinking about this period of time. Mozart was one of his heroes, and the poetry, and you got the Goethe has a lot to do with this because Goethe wrote the Faustian tale, but he's also bringing back Greek learning into German Enlightenment. So it's just the richest time of all to live. He's brought up in like an upper middle class family, 2 vineyards they own. His father's a very accomplished lawyer. He basically ran the bar of his time. But also he's got loving relationships all around. He's got a caring family, brothers and sisters. Like he's got a really good life. And you asked the question, I got to take a second and say, well, you brought up Jewish in Prussia at the time. You're still going to feel some level of alienation for sure because you're not given all the rights. And he fought for some Jewish rights, but not for practicing Judaism. He didn't believe in the religious piece of it, although he did. He smuggles it in as a prophet. But So coming up in that time and the richness of it and the learning and what he's exposed to, I mean, that would be what I think any parent would hope a child would grow up with. And he had poetic instincts. He was brilliant, like a bookish, brilliant guy with memory and he was kind of a prankster. He was kind of like got along with, had friends. But there's something for him that was missing the whole time that just draws a storyteller right to him. Like most of the conditions we shouldn't know about you given these conditions. What's the driver? Like what to pick, and that's where I pick up on it. So that's paradise. Like why leave this place? Why not take the good and the bad, talk about the bad, and then he winds up getting thrown out. Not thrown out, he's censored so much he leaves. He has to leave Prussia. And then from there, before you go to Purgatorio, I think if I'm counting correctly, he has 6 exiles in his life. So what's amazing is Dante is an exiled figure at the time.
Yes.
Exile, he has the Ghibellines and the what's the other group? He's in a time where there's two classes and warfare going on all the time. He's in exile, just like Marx. Dante thinks the Holy Roman Empire is coming to an end and a fall. He writes the Divine Comedy thinking it's going to be like an apocalyptic vision of how a new era could be born by restoration to the spiritual. The idea that man recollects and takes back his origins of like knowing the classical world and the Christian world coming together, and writes this masterpiece to show like the journey of how he got there. Meanwhile, punishing popes and there's 4 popes upside down and like drowning in water in Inferno. And
yes.
Okay. So like he's trashing the corruption of the time, but Dante, I'm going to go slow here, is an highly political figure.
Yeah.
Okay. So Marx also knows about Dante. One scholar went as far as to say that the very contours of the Inferno were written of Das Kapital, were designed by this, and tries to make an academic case, but he's kind of trashed a bit. He didn't quite, it's critiqued and it's not accepted and embraced in academia. But in that seed, what I heard was, but it was true that he was not writing a book of economics. He was writing a moral quest, and he was very literary. So he would quote poets and he tried to be a poet himself and actually sold 2 poems in a well-known journal of the time. So he was bringing a moral quest, a moral vision. He wasn't talking like, if you give this many dollars to the poor, but it was like along with the moral quest, and that's it. So for me, that period set up, it still feels like he could be a person of change. He could accomplish a lot of his goals. Why not stay in paradise?
Yeah. But then that leads to book 2 is the Revolutionary in Purgatory. So tell us a little bit more how he gets there. Yeah. So this is in his exile period. This is when he's starting to get exiled.
He got exiled twice from France, one from Belgium, and then wound up from 1849 until he died, 1883, winds up in London. So this is what's amazing about this whole story, is that when you think of Marx, you think of Russian, and if not, maybe German, some people. But he's from 1849 to 1883, he was in London.
Oh, really? I didn't process that.
Yeah. He spoke English, German, French, learned Italian, taught himself Russian, but not fluent. So he was also, but ultimately his main writings from 1848 after the Communist Manifesto, he wasn't the only one starting a revolution. There was revolutions all over the world at the time. He was writing the Communist Manifesto in 1848 to reflect what he thought the world, like again, back to Dante with the Holy Roman Empire. He thought this era was coming to an end and communism would be born out of its fall. So he was creating his works out of that. He thought he would help it along with the Communist Manifesto by giving it a tool, but the body of his work is not represented in the Communist Manifesto. That's an early 1848, so he's 35.
Okay.
But that track is something done for a strict purpose because they start these international groups to gather. The workers of the world unite. But within the workers, there's democratic societies, there's other groups. But so it's a snapshot. It does make the point. It's kind of in its the sharpest blade way, the sharpest spear, Communist Manifesto. But it's not indicative of all the nuances going on and the conditions going on. So purgatory to me is, how does he now fight his own battles? Like, give him the credit of sensing injustice to some degree. It's not all like radical blind rage or revenge. So if he wants to fight all the injustices of the time, I'm gonna watch him do it. Like, what's the steps he takes? Does he write? And you just see that. For me, my take was he was like an activist radical. They're hardwired. Maybe back to my John the Baptist. Another prophet here. Prophet motive. They're hardwired for change. Like they don't get the fulfillment until the change happens. That's why he said the purpose of all philosophy is no longer to think, but to see the change. I'm not quoting it exactly, but to see change. Yeah. So he gets on this trip. But what I thought brought him down was his personal inadequacies and his inability to see his family, the people who loved him, the mentors that raised him. He broke down because I think he left behind in this radical, whether it's formed in part or all by injustice and changing the world, because he had his Rust Belts at the time. He's writing about his Rust Belts. So Moselle, the vineyards are picked up and just leave all these poor people and the state doesn't take care of them. Like there's real legitimate things. Or I'll give you one other example I describe in detail in the book, but it'll help. So he fights this, I think it's called The Branches. I won't get the exact title now, but he's fighting for the people because the wealthy class that had trees on their properties, right? Over time, there was so many poor people are everywhere, you have to understand, especially in Britain at the time. But he's seeing this, and the branches are falling as they wither over time, and they're falling to the soil, and the poor people are coming by and taking the branches and burning the fire to stay warm in their hovels somewhere down in Germany, Prussia. And the wealthier class passes a law so that these people can't take the branches off their property. And their argument is, over time, the branches will turn into a softer material and then good for the soil and dissolve into the soil. And I always thought, just take that argument a bit further. What if the wind blows one of those branches off the property and then start debating about whether the poor person picked it up 2 blocks away, and then do you bring it back to the property and then put it back in this? Like he was picking off the inconsistencies of how one must be ethical and can't think of pure economics about the world. But anyway, so back to Purgatory. So he has a series of things to overcome. In the end, I think his journey is like a radical, trying to find his cause, but leaving behind some of the roots that would temper him, like his spiritual journey.
Hey guys, did you know that the Conor Gallagher Show is also on Spotify and Apple Podcast? Be sure to go over there and give us a follow. Thanks so much. Now back to the episode. Yeah, what about the whole devil and Karl Marx side of things? You know, your friend Kangor, how does this kind of demonic side to his life, how does that factor into this timeline, and what was he doing?
That's back in Prussia. So he gives that up before he leaves Prussia. So he wrote for a while. He aspired to write poetry. Let me see. He was attracted to romantic and Gothic literature, and at the time, and really like the Faustian ideas, similar. Prometheus, the one who steals fire. Yeah. Lucifer falls into that. And revolutionaries, I'm not making excuses that this can't go deeper in this dive for a person, like being more committed to this in a spiritual sense. But for me, my take on it was, so at the time, Bakunin also wrote about the devil and a lot of the revolutionaries, because they think about it, if you're arguing with the power structures that be, what better figure than Lucifer?
Lucifer was the ultimate rebel. Yeah.
The ultimate rebel, because he's going against the perception of reality. He's arguing with what is the natural order, right? So he's a perfect figure to choose, but there's a whole line of them, like which he's in. So the poetry at the time evokes the devil and a lot of that. His unique Satanism, I think there's a couple of poems where what he infuses into the language in the poetry, and he wrote a play, and the name of the play was Emmanuel, backward. So so these are pretty, like, he's aware of what he's doing. Just to hold that thought. He converted to Christianity early, but then gave it up at a certain point. But he had to write certain papers when he was in school, in their gymnasium of the time in Prussia. But he had to write articles about Christ and everything. He wrote something called The Union in Christ using the Gospel of John. It's like beautifully written, like beautiful, like ultimately Christianity is the glue that holds together humankind because it teaches. And that you're reading this going like, he knew enough to know where, if he was leaving this, he knew what he was leaving because the way he wrote about it.
That's important.
When he was young, and his father converted and actually sent him a Bible at one point. So he was informed enough about what it meant to be a Christian, whether he embraced it. We don't know his internal, but the way he wrote about it, he knew what he was writing about or leaving.
That's very important. I mean, that shows the culpability was likely much higher.
I'll follow up with you. I'll send you the article.
I'd like to read that.
Christ. It would blow your mind. It's like you would use it to teach.
It wouldn't blow my mind. Here's why, Robert, is because the people that have the greatest potential to be saints have the greatest potential to be sinners, and vice versa. I mean, when you have these people that have, passion in their heart, the guy could have founded a religious order and perhaps been one of the greatest saints of all time. Instead,
I think he did, by the way.
He ends up being Karl Marx.
I think he did find a religious order, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, I wrote a whole book on this. I don't know if you heard.
What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, do you want to do purgatory and fin, or you want to go to this now?
I don't care.
Okay, I like that. Go where it goes. So the premise of my book is that he created an inverted eschaton.
Okay.
So if you understand how the eschatological thinking is organized in Paul, for instance, there's a beginning and a fall. This is like classic organizing of a narrative. You have the classic fall. You have the key sin, right? The key sin, in our case, in Christianity, it's the fall, right? Then you have the central action, which is Jesus Christ to be redeemed. So you have like a 5-step tragic art that's used for eschatological conversation. Now, this eschatological form goes all the way back through Judaism, both in scripture and apocryphal writings. Mm-hmm. So using the form is a way of me organizing and measure. Did Marx check all the boxes? Because I know what Paul's form was. And like, because in Romans, he argues what happened in the garden, what Jesus represented, the new Adam, on and on and on. What Marx does is he plugs in materialist categories in all the same steps, but ultimately he's telling an apocalyptic story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's the invert. If you took the spiritual and you made it material, that's what he ultimately is doing. And I got there, as I started to say before, and let me know if I'm going too quick on this, because I really want the audience to understand this. I went to this somewhat innocent because I didn't know how he was rooted in the thinkers and his influences. But people don't know this, but he's a product of Adam Smith and Ricardo. So his British critique of economy comes from the Scottish Enlightenment guys, like Wealth of Nations.
I know Adam Smith, but who's Ricardo?
Like his equal of the time, like a big capitalist, right? Early free market guy. I'm more on that side. But when you read their critiques of capitalism, that's what Marx is getting. He's getting it from them. Mm. So the guy who wrote Wealth of Nations never wanted to separate Wealth of Nations from Moral Sentiments, which was the book prior. You don't have capitalism without moral sentiment, because people will become tyrannical. He said it, capitalism will become tyrannical. Yes. Now, he did say there were balancing forces of market, and sometimes through self-interest, you help the other. There are positive. But I'm saying he would have never just like written a check for like laissez-faire capitalism. That was not what he understood how powerful.
You mean Adam Smith?
Adam Smith, yeah. So in the book, I actually start one chapter where you think I'm quoting Marx. I'm quoting Adam Smith.
Wow.
Because he's just imbibing them, and he's using British kind of, but he's not original. Das Kapital will do something different. But this is his training period, and it is in purgatory. Like he does a big deep dive study. I think it's 1849 to 1851 or 52. He goes back and forth to, but at one point he and Engels did a deep dive into British economy. But his ideas of revolution come from Voltaire, Montesquieu.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah, I know them both.
Yeah, he picked up from them with the radical revolution, like the state, overthrow of the state. He's seen Napoleon 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
So he has the model of what a revolution like that looks like. He didn't make that up.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at that going, okay. And then his philosophy is basically he tries to morph Hegel out of his dialectical
Yes, he does. Yeah.
idea of the great spirit or the great mind.
The world soul.
Yeah. Which is common because Adam Smith with the invisible hand, and at the time they're taking Christian ideas and stripping them of their literal representation and giving these generic languages to both satisfy keeping them in play, but letting the Enlightenment idea represent them in a different way. So if you think he's getting his philosophy from Hegel, and he gets it also from Feuerbach, gets it from Bauer, who, by the way, most of those left Hegelians are at the time reading Strauss, the book on Jesus, the search for the historical Christ. They're all seminarians. And Hegel was like trained Lutheran. So if you go digging deeper into Hegel, they're all coming from the religious roots of like a evangelical Lutheranism and millenarian thinking of the 19th century, which is where Zionism begins, by the way.
Have you read Honor de Lubac, The Drama of Atheistic Humanism?
It's in my, I quoted, not heavily, but I quoted it several times.
Well, that's...
He calls all this out.
Yeah.
I don't know why everyone doesn't read it.
It's a brilliant book.
It is.
Brilliant book.
Yeah, because he maps this whole thing. I'm like, I'm not the only one thinking of what I'm...
No. It's a brilliant book by Ignatius, our friends at Ignatius. So I would have loved to have published that one. But I read it back in college, so it's been a long time. And it's funny, you read something in college, you don't have the life experience.
I know.
If all I did now, Robert, for the rest of my life is just go back and read the texts that I was exposed to in college and grad school, maybe, that would be plenty. I could spend the rest of my life just doing that, and because I had a good education in college and grad school, but I didn't understand what the hell I was reading. I couldn't.
Education is wasted on the youth.
Exactly right.
It is
exactly
because
right.
it's not lived knowledge.
Right.
Back to McIntyre, you learn virtue by living the truth. It's not a doctrine. It's not like a shove it in your head and then make sure you hit the talking points, sound bites.
Yeah.
A soundbite society.
That's good.
It's lived. It's like you walk with the cross. You don't teach the cross. You walk with a cross.
Yeah.
So back to my drama, the idea of the narrative. So where I was getting with that, I can go on and on. But it was that he was largely derivative. So I said, this is not his genius. Why is this catching? Why are people still? What's he selling that people are still buying if he's derivative? Derivative thinkers pass, they move on, they get listed in a line. It wasn't that, is that he, to me, was more like Jeremiah or Isaiah. He was shaping a moral quest, a justice, a revolution that was basically the material way of saying a new eschaton is coming. Mankind will be changed, but instead of changing him spiritually, Dante's warning, he's going to change him materially. So by destroying the old economy and reorganizing it, and it failed on so many ways. And so because his fundamental flaw was, if you want to be technical, he didn't understand anthropology. If you want to be technical philosophically, he didn't understand anthropology. That who's to say the class that rose up wouldn't become tyrannical?
Yeah.
That's just one argument, but there's so many critiques of what he thought.
Is another way of saying that his fundamental flaw is he just did not appreciate original sin?
Yeah. I think you start in life from the fragility of your mind and your life and your transparency. I think you start from I know nothing. And it's time for me to listen for a while in college. You're not an activist. Who's it, Jordan Peterson? Before you save the whole world, make your bed. I love that. Because you could say that to him all along, why he catches so well.
Yeah.
Is you're kind of like, not yet, Carl. Like, how about at 40 we think about blowing the world up? Like, you haven't learned a thing. You've learned how to be an activist, a thought police person. Yeah. Anyway, so all I'm saying is that led me to say, no, this is more like a spiritual possession. It's almost like something that could jump bodies, because if it keeps something, and you could even argue Christianity does this certain ways, right? It shows up in different forms as it develops over time, because contingencies change and the real conflicts that we would define. You would define the master-slave conflict differently than a capitalist conflict, which are the contingent ways of describing them. That's like this world now, but the world's going to change again. So he was arguing, well, who's to say we can't evolve to a point where we're no longer set up between these bipolar power structures? So it's a vision, just like Paul saying, in the end, there's no Greek, there's no Jew, there's no man, no female, there's no slave or master or slave. He's arguing the same thing. The difference is, and I wrote on this at one point, Paul saying that in Christ is the answer. See, in Christ, these distinctions are not obliterated. You change enough to deal with them at a certain level of humility, empathy. That's why I go back to John Paul II's critique of capitalism. Like, it's not about fixing it through power and money forces. It never works. People are way too greedy for this. But it's about, what he's saying is that, but Marx is not offering that. He's just saying the conditions of the material world will make people eventually evolve and revolt to that new place. And I think it's a misguided idea of anthropology. And what spirit, even if you don't embrace Christianity, the caution of a spiritual worldview is that you're a piece of the truth. You never have it all. And that's a caution.
So Marx goes through first paradise, great youth, great opportunity, good situation.
Yeah. He could have taken a much different course than he did.
And then purgatory, and then author in hell. He goes to hell, so to speak. So
most of his purgatory I see as a series of descending failures, because the 1848 peters out. He spends, in my opinion, again, like this is 5 years of reading him, but I'm sure a scholar at 25 years can challenge the nuance of this. But I'm finding him almost like someone who's living the good old days. Like in the 60s, we almost had it. Like we did it. We almost had that moment like at Woodstock. He's doing that his whole life about 1848, and the comedy, like that was it. It was about to happen. And he watched for the rest of his life moments where he could infuse the radical ideas and fire up another revolution, and he would get exiled to keep finding it. But in the meanwhile, he was starting movements, but people didn't like him. They were pointing out the critiques we are to him, and he would ignore everyone. And he became, in my mind, more isolated and more leaning on study. He was in the British Museum all the time studying, a British Library. And he was still, but he was becoming this isolated being where he was going to do it all now more through his writing and the author. And that's where he started hatching the concept Das Kapital, which is like his magnum opus for everything else he's done. But in the meanwhile, I mean, just a level of study and like preparedness. And he would go into, he'll study the whole history of art and Roman art and Greek art, and he'll unpack a language. And he was incredibly brilliant but he seemed to not have the center. Like these were almost like distractions. If you just focus a little bit more on like nuancing your Das Kapital and finding money for your family, because then he was also, they had 7 children total. 3 died before, I think, 8 years old. And his 2 elder daughters who survived him committed suicide in pacts with their husbands.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the 7th one was illegitimate, who he had through his house with his housemaid. And he lived without him, but Marx never talked to him. And he kept him like alienated his whole life. And actually he lived a decent life compared to the rest. So you see this, and his wife, who gave up basically Jenny Westphalen, but she gave up like the life of an elite level cultured woman to follow him and because she was stimulated because she believed in the injustice piece of this. But she stood by his side, and I call her in the book his Beatrice, like Dante. Yeah.
Yeah, you really draw the parallels here. That's really cool.
Yeah,
That's
I keep pulling in how equal, radical, trying to do it, but how they did it tells the whole story for how you get at this. Is it perpetual revolution without the humility of a spiritual inner journey? Impossible. That's an imbalance that anyone could point that out. You don't have to be like a genius of insight. You could point that out. He has no tempering forces in his own trajectory in his life that's just going to get bad all the way through. And you see it deteriorate, I think, over time, where he doesn't even accomplish his own goals. And there's a point toward the end where Engels writes to him to tell him how sorry he is that he lost his wife. And he quickly acknowledges it and goes back to like the needing money and all this. And Engels like shuts him off, and he's like writing him going, Engels telling Marx in a letter how he hurt him so bad. Like, how could you treat me this way after so many years? Like, this is indicative of what I'm saying is revealing if you're looking at it through a spiritual lens. Like at some point, there's no guide, there's no boundaries. It's all about the revolution. And I think back to 2020, I think that spirit has been loosed in culture now, where if you could just be violent enough, if you could just protest enough, it's like this perpetual protesting, but for what? And where are you going? And what are you saying the problems are? And that's kind of why all of that cocktail came to be what I worked on for 5 years.
So it's almost like what I'm almost hearing you say is there's like the spirit of Marxism, but then there's also just the spirit of Karl Marx, who is a disgruntled, angry man who is searching for some answers in life as a revolutionary without God, without morality, following his own gospel.
Looking for himself.
Looking for himself. And that that
That's it.
spirit
That's
of
it. Like,
Karl
that's
Marx
what
has
I-
made its way into our culture. That's
Right.
what I hear you saying.
Because there's a and this is the first time I'm speaking about this subject matter, but you're getting me to these places, which is really good. So he's deferring what the real issues might be. That might even help his own mission. They might help his own writing and effectiveness, but he keeps deferring it because he's not getting at himself. He's not dealing with himself. And I'm thinking about that. If you just think about like the general growth development model of any culture, you have to address yourself. You have to address your father, right? You have to address certain things to overcome. Just for developmental levels, he's deferring it all. But the radicalism, we could just change it all because the bad guys are right there. If you just get them out of the way, then you just think of that today, what's going on, especially the young people in the college. Like they have a generation of this.
A fatherless generation.
Fatherless generation, bad man, bad male, bad. Because what does he do? He gives boundaries and teaches you to temper yourself. And you have to read his father's letters. They're beautiful. If I had another life to live, just the relationship with his father trying to reach him and his letters and everything, and how sad he was. Like I hope you're not going into all this crazy. And like he's warning him how to temper himself and be like a gentleman and actually look to God for things because he was a deist, more of a deist, his father.
It's remarkable. I can't wait to read this book.
You can read the book?
I'm going to read the book.
You better read it.
Yeah. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating and it's important. And what you've done is you've pulled something out from a very important historical time and brought it and showed its complete relevance today.
That's what I'm trying to do.
It's completely relevant. And, Mark Twain brilliantly said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And I love that. And
how about, let me get the Marx quote in there. So Marx said, history happens the first time as a tragedy, second time as a farce.
Wow.
That's the opening quote of my book, yeah.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice,
You did
shame
it again.
on me.
You did it again.
That's right.
And in a way, he is using like a morality there. He is saying, no, you're a fool if you don't get it the first time.
We've been going over 2.5 hours. We should probably cut it off. But I mean, Robert, you're a fascinating guy, man. This has been fun. We talked about Patton.
Tell that to the people who I know really close.
All right, I will. He's a fascinating guy. We could talk for another 3 hours. We really could. But we've covered Patton. We've covered John Paul II and Ronald Reagan and the Shroud. We touched on St. Paul a little bit, but didn't really get into that.
I have to come back for that.
Yeah, I have to come back. And then this brilliant new work. So you're a true artist, and you're inspired by God, and you're doing this out of not just intellectual curiosity and insatiable thirst for hunger and truth, but for your faith. So I appreciate it and I commend you. Thank you for being here,
Thank
man.
you. And I've done it imperfectly.
Well, so do we all. So do we all. All right. See you next time.
Take care.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.